Chapter 905. Just like this tired lone army, the bright moon of planet Mo finally broke through the blockade of the thick clouds after a difficult climb. It leaped into the deep blue night sky, immediately suppressing the surrounding starlight. The bright but still cold moonlight slanted down from outside the atmosphere, illuminating the mountain pass piled with snow and rubble. Even further away from the cliff, one could faintly see the moonlight mixed with countless clouds dancing together, turning into an indescribable illusory scene. Not many people could personally witness this rare scene of the moon moving clouds at night, but Sulu did not walk out of the hanging cliff to enjoy the scenery. He walked through the shadows to the cliff edge and stopped. Standing in the darkness, he threw his military backpack into the moonlight. His slender and steady fingers quickly adjusted the equipment, and he listened carefully to the background noise of the electric noise in his ears. He changed the direction of the fan in the air with a fixed rhythm. Finally, he heard the sound that he hated most of the time, but now it sounded exceptionally pleasant. I am here, 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 I am here. Listening to Philip's non-stop repetition in his ears, Sulu could not help but frown. He scolded in a low voice, "Are you a repeater or are you reciting poetry again? In order to let you find me when you want to find me, I have to keep repeating this sentence like an idiot. It's already very hard. As for reciting poetry, if it was reciting poetry, I would definitely say, I am not here, I am somewhere else." Sulu was stunned for a moment before he mocked. Just now, I was mocked for being a third-rate philosopher. Now I understand that it was all because of you, a fourth-rate philosopher. Please, you want a mechanical brain to master philosophy, this boring human magic game? Cut the crap. Sulu lowered his head and began to pack his military backpack. Hurry up and send a spaceship to pick us up. There are 14 people in total. You can calculate the location yourself. In his opinion, since the two sides were in contact, it was very easy for Philip to bring this lone army to a safe area with his ability. That was why he was in the mood. Looking at the cold moonlight outside the cliff, he stood in the shadows of the cliff and joked with Philip, who he had not seen in a long time. However, Philip's reply immediately extinguished all of his hope. Outside the atmosphere of the Mo planet, the strange-looking black spaceship was currently moving at an extremely high speed. Thousands of kilometers away, two three-winged spaceships were trying to find something. In the central control room deep within the black spaceship, a slender alloy probe vibrated angrily at a high speed. Philip used a precise ground communication device and screamed towards a nameless peak in the southwest darkness. That meteorite belt is not my home in Bermuda. How can I hide there forever? In order to find you, an unorganized, undisciplined, and good-natured person, how could they not be discovered by those lousy ships? Yes, they're lousy ship. I'm a good ship, but I can't compete with others who have too many ships. Both fleets have discovered me, especially the fleet from the Federation. They're looking for me like crazy. What else can I do other than hide like a thief? Zhong Huiyan, who was sitting cross-legged in a round chair, was eating ice cream in boredom. She glanced at the picture of the rear area on the light beam now and then, to make sure that the two three-winged warships of the Federation charter that were like flies hadn't noticed the burn marks that she had left behind. The beautiful girl had no interest in participating in this kind of scene that had happened frequently in the past 3 years. Although she was worried about Sulu's safety, she knew that Philip was telling the truth. In the past few hours, the Federation fleet had suddenly increased the patrols on the Dark Hemisphere. This seemingly omnipotent spaceship was almost surrounded by several giant ships several times. No one knew what Sulu said in the communication system, but the slender alloy sensor trembled more and more violently. Like a child whose pure feelings were hurt, she said angrily, "I'm sorry. Of course I have the ability to parachute onto the Mo planet. Don't you know what I'm capable of? I only need to destroy 4 Federation warships, and I can easily take your lousy troops away." Philip's voice suddenly became solemn and dignified at this moment. According to my calculations, at least 23,556 Federation soldiers have died. Are you sure? There was a moment of silence in the control room. After hearing Su Li's answer, Philip said proudly, I knew that a wavering pseudo-pacifist like you wouldn't have the ability or the determination to make such a decision. If you were Du Shaoqing, would I still hesitate? Then his voice became serious again. Give me some time. I've been trying to hack into the Federation's air and ground command network, but the cold, broken computer under the Federation's underground is obviously well prepared, and the progress is very slow. Let me tell you a piece of bad news. That guy has improved a lot. Xiong Linquan looked at Su Lu, who was walking down the cliff, and noticed that his expression was a little strange. He frowned and asked, What's wrong? I heard you talking to someone just now. I have a spaceship up there. Don't worry, there's no problem. Su Lu didn't put down the heavy marching backpack in his hand and directly said to everyone under the cliff, Withdraw quickly after you've rested. We have to enter the clouds before dawn. No one hesitated. They pulled out the oxygen tubes in their noses, stood up, and began to organize their equipment. Paul, who had been squatting alone in the corner, silently took off the military blanket in his hand and returned it to Mountain Pao. Then, like before, he took the marching backpack from Su Li's hand. When Su Lu hung the heavy firearms around his neck and turned around to tie up Dongfang Yu, he found that Xiong Linquan had already tied Dongfang Yu onto his back and had already walked more than 10 meters away. He could vaguely hear Dongfang Yu mumbling on his broad back, I'm a piece of trash, but now I've become a treasure that's being robbed. Su Lu smiled, snatched the heavy supply box from Monkey's hands, and strode forward. Nameless Peak still belonged to the Pingliang mountain range. After they crossed the pass, it was equivalent to crossing the entire mountain range and coming to the south. The terrain on this side of the peak was obviously much flatter. Although the distance between the 2 points was relatively far, at least it wasn't as difficult and dangerous as before. It didn't take too long for the team to re-enter the thick lead clouds from more than 5,000 meters above sea level. The clear light in the night sky was once again swallowed by the clouds, and the surroundings were dark. Only the close-range searchlight on the helmet and the fluorescent stick hanging from Monkey's but at the forefront illuminated the path beneath their feet. In a sparse mountain willow forest, the team decided to temporarily rest for a while. Xiong Linquan stood in front of the rock slope, pointed in front and said, Continue to walk for 30 kilometers in this direction and you will see a large lake. Go around that lake and you will reach Autumn Leaf Plains. Then pass through a gentle mountain and you will reach the camp. If nothing happened to old Gu, he should be waiting for us in that camp now. Su Lu, who was standing beside him, narrowed his eyes and looked into the endless night. The base doesn't know the exact location of the camp? This is a habit of NTR. The location of the camp is strictly kept a secret. It was chosen at the last minute during the mission. Even the division headquarters doesn't know where the camp is. Su Lu nodded and narrowed his eyes. The fog around the rock peaks was actually the lead clouds that could be seen when looking up from the ground. It blocked out all the light in all directions, so they couldn't see the lake and autumn leaf plains that Xiong Linquan had mentioned. Xiong Linquan brought up the electronic map, tapped his finger lightly and said, We will turn at the edge of autumn leaf plains. According to the orders of the General Staff, all federal forces are strictly prohibited from entering the eastern region of autumn leaf plains. Why? I heard that the Academy of Sciences expert support team discovered that the graphite mine east of autumn leaf plains has mutated. The radiation is especially severe, and the human body can't withstand this kind of radiation at all. The detour will be longer, and the chances of encountering enemies will be higher. Su Lu looked at the clear red line on the electronic map and frowned. Is the General Staff's statement reliable? Will there be any problems? The underground resistance has been sending in intelligence. There is a rich graphite mine below the plateau, but the Empire has never minded. This can be used as proof. Su Lu agreed with this judgment after a moment of silence. He and Xiong Linquan didn't notice that Dongfang Yu, who was sitting behind them, frowned after hearing this. I'm still worried about the sky. We walked for too long outside the clouds just now. Will the base discover us? Xiong Linquan put away the electronic map, looked at Su Lu, and said worriedly, "The sensitivity of military satellites isn't high, but the Bureau of Proclamation must have scattered countless signal relay stations in the sky above the southwest war zone. Those things are very good at capturing the pulse of the identity chip." Speaking of this, he subconsciously touched the back of his neck and laughed self-deprecatingly. "I've lived for almost 40 years, and there are only a few times when I remember that I have a chip buried in my neck. Only now do I realize that this thing is really deadly." "Boss, is the chip behind your neck still there? Does the Empire have a way to take it out?" If the Empire had such advanced technology, this war wouldn't have started at all. Su Lu replied with a smile. He didn't discuss this further. He patted Xiong Linquan's shoulder and said, "Don't worry about the glory of the charter. Just keep walking. It'll be fine as long as we don't run into the enemy." From the beginning of their escape until now, no one in the team had noticed that there was a small device in Su Li's jacket pocket that kept emitting a faint blue light, an invisible blue light. Going all the way down from the nameless mountain pass, the exhausted team had just left the lead clouds and entered the thick fog. This strange fog cast a layer of ominous foreboding in the team's hearts. According to the Federal Forces Military Manual, Mo Hua Planet, especially the southwest mining zone, had never had such a large and continuous foggy weather in this season. Just as the atmosphere of the team was oppressed to the extreme by the thick fog, the surrounding environment suddenly changed rapidly. The fog was disappearing at a speed visible to the naked eye. To be more precise, it was being absorbed by some strange force and then evaporated without a trace. The sky at the end of the rugged mountain path suddenly brightened, and a tranquil lake appeared before everyone's eyes. However, the disappearing fog was not a gift from the sky, but the influence of the human war. The team members on the mountain path saw the densely packed mecha and armored vehicles by the lake, saw the bullet lines dancing in the sky, and felt the blazing artillery fire that was enough to evaporate the fog. They were so shocked that they couldn't say anything. They were witnessing the decisive final battle between the Federation and the Empire in the Southwest War Zone. Chapter 906. Hundreds of cruise missiles whizzed over from the distant horizon. With an irresistible, terrifying power, they smashed into the enemy's base. Following the violent explosion, countless suns rose above the lakeside field at the same time, making the real sun outside the lead clouds even dimmer. The high temperature represented by the blazing white light instantly evaporated the thick fog that shrouded the battlefield. Beside the remains of the armored vehicles that were blown away, hundreds of clusters of thick smoke spread out ferociously. Countless black dust condensed into clouds that covered the lakeside and blocked everyone's sight. Accompanied by ear-numbing, terrifying screeching noises, the level-fire dense arrays of the Federation and the Imperium opened fire at the same time. Threads of light that were even denser than the heavy rain tore through the air above the lake at a high speed. Tens of thousands of fine red threads of light melted the last remaining fog in the air and landed on the enemy's position. Every thin light thread was a dense artillery shell. Tens of thousands of artillery shells exploded on the fields around the lake at the same time. It was a spectacular scene with terrifying power. The black soil at the frontmost area was all blown up by the intense bombardment. Countless miserable holes appeared on the temporary alloy bunker built by the engineering mechas. Even Su Lu and the others, who were standing at the foot of the nameless mountain more than 10 kilometers away, could feel the ground trembling slightly. From time to time, artillery fire would land on the surface of the lake. Although the probability of the dense artillery fire deviating from its trajectory was not high, because of the high frequency of firing on the battlefield, the lake between the two armies, which was originally as calm as a mirror, began to surge with wave after wave. The water splashed with the mud at the bottom of the lake, and the corpses of countless silver fish that had been shaken to death began to pile up on the shore. Xiong Linquan and the others stood at the foot of the nameless mountain and silently watched the battlefield through the telescopes in their individual helmet. Their expressions were extremely complicated. Because of the distance between them and the battlefield, the loud explosions sounded somewhat muffled and soft in their ears. However, they could feel the earth-shaking momentum. They couldn't hear the screams on the battlefield, but they could imagine how many of their comrades were screaming in pain and then dying. Just as they were lamenting, or perhaps they didn't even have the time to sigh, the Federation and Empire mecha on the battlefield began to charge. Hundreds of the most advanced military mecha in the universe stepped on the soft ground, waving their fire-spitting mechanical arms, and collided with each other like two unstoppable mountain-splitting axes. Ever since the Federation had successfully developed the MX mecha and the Empire had successfully developed the Wolf-Fang mecha, military mecha were no longer synonymous with clumsiness. Instead, they had become terrifying war machines that combined mobility and destructive power perfectly. They had become the main force of direct combat. In this intergalactic war that lasted for many years, countless MX and Wolf-Fang mechas fought fiercely on the surface of dozens of planets. Black and green cold alloy torrents clashed with each other, playing out from time to time. However, after witnessing this scene of hundreds of mecha charging forward at high speed, the people at the foot of Nameless Peak still felt an unprecedented fear. It was as if they could clearly hear the terrifying sound of those sturdy alloy armors being deformed under the high-speed collisions. It was as if they could hear with their own ears the clicking sound of Darren's rotary cannon firing a rain of bullets. There were sounds of collisions, shooting, snapping, and explosions. The sound of drums filled the air. The sound of war drums. The combined forces of the Federation and the Empire's main forces that were battling on the plains by the lake definitely exceeded the number of 4 combined mecha divisions. As the battle at the Straits entered an irreversible end, the Southwest War Zone that had already been engaged in fierce battles for 2 months was about to welcome its final victory. The Federation's reinforcements to the Southwest War Zone had arrived. The 2 reserve mecha brigades that the Empire had always held in the palm of their hands had also entered the fray. The Empire was at a disadvantage in the overall battle. For the next half a year, they would have to shrink back and maintain a defensive posture. They would definitely do whatever it took to protect the Southwest region, which had important military mineral resources and could be used to guard the route to the north. What was puzzling was that the Federation military had displayed an extremely resolute attitude in this battle. It was definitely not as simple as just helping the frontline troops retreat. The members at the foot of Nameless Peak naturally didn't know the strategic significance of this battle to the Federation due to their position. They only looked at the terrifying front of the battlefield and thought of the battle yesterday. They felt some lingering fear, but they also felt lucky. At that time, if they had shaken off just a little slower, the Empire's vanguard battalion would have all come over. They definitely wouldn't have survived. The mood of the members was somewhat gloomy, eerily gloomy. Right now they should be burning with passion, joining their own troops to attack the Empire's enemies. However, right now they could only stand at an extremely far distance and watch silently, like bystanders. Let's leave before we are discovered. Sulu retracted his gaze and said to the members, "Adjust our previous route. Walk into the fog. Wherever there is fog, we will walk there. Try to go as deep as possible." The lonely spectators quietly left Nameless Peak and turned back to dive into the remaining thick fog at the southern foot of the mountain. They walked in the fog, silently walking. They didn't know where to go. They only knew that the further away they were from the battlefield, the better. However, on this vast continent of the ink flower planet, from the beginning of the third year onwards, green mountains and clear waters were everywhere. How could they hide? Designation: Reconnaissance Battalion of the 11th Division. Who's the battalion commander? Xiong Linquan turned back to look at Dongfangyu. Dongfangyu mouthed a name. He raised an eyebrow, somewhat in disbelief, and replied hesitantly, "Bandits of the southern mountains?" Dongfangyu sighed helplessly, thinking to herself, "Your eyesight is really too bad. How could you really think of the southern mountains as bandits of the southern mountains?" At the other end of the fog, a narrow path could be vaguely seen between two boulders. At the other end of the path, the Federation soldier asked in a low voice, "Why is there no authentication signal?" Walking in the fog, it was very difficult to see anything more than 10 meters away. In order to prevent the signal from leaking out, Xiong Linquan had ordered the members to turn off all surveillance equipment. There was simply no way to predict what kind of situation they would encounter. Thus, they were extremely unlucky to have run into this Federation soldier, who was either alone or on sentry duty. Fortunately, when they were hurrying along earlier, Dongfangyu had told a dirty joke in the Federation language in order to mock Su Li's lack of discipline. Otherwise, the team would have very likely been shot in the back by the other party. When he thought of this, Xiong Linquan felt some lingering fear. Unable to answer the other party's question about the lack of authentication caused his mood to become even heavier. He gripped the heavy rifle in his hand tightly and turned back to look sternly at the team members who had already entered combat position. He slowly opened his right hand, extended 2 fingers, and made a horizontal stroke. The mountain cannon and the beads disappeared into the fog like ghosts. What made Xiong Linquan feel slightly relieved was that Su Lu had already disappeared ahead of time. A few muffled sounds came from the rocky path at the other end of the fog. Su Lu withdrew his palm and crouched beside the 2 knocked-out Federation soldiers. He pulled out the audio cable in the soldiers' helmets and connected it to his own military backpack. After listening silently for a moment, he said, "We're lucky. There are 2 sentry posts. They should be the tail of a certain unit. They haven't reported the situation in time, so we have a chance to slip away." Using the thick fog, they set off again. Because they were too close to the Federation's reconnaissance company, the team members didn't even dare to breathe loudly. They just silently looked at the blurry figures on the other side of the fog with a somewhat strange expression on their faces. On the other side was their own unit. They were right beside them but couldn't see them. This was like a wanderer who saw the door but couldn't walk in. They could only quietly pass by like this. Or rather, pass by. At some point in time, the team had walked out of the thickest fog. Mountain Pao turned back to take a look. When he thought of the Federation's troops that had brushed past him, his expression was a little downcast. Beside him, Monkey lowered his head and wiped his eyes. Xiong Linquan's expression was also very ugly. What he was most worried about now was that the team's supplies were seriously insufficient and they didn't have much ammunition left. After walking out of the fog area and then out of the electronic cloud screen, the team would definitely encounter more dangers. What should they do when the time came? The only thing he could comfort himself with was that this place wasn't far from Camp No. 1. As long as old Gu, who had used 3 years to feed himself into a fat pig, was still alive, he would definitely have a lot of good stuff hidden away. Su Lu looked at the expression on his face and comforted him. We all know old Gu's personality. He's still alive even if anyone dies. That's true. Xiong Linquan shook his head and laughed lightly. Back then, he followed you into Charter Square. Among the old guys, he was the only one who didn't run away. But he was also the first to surrender. You killed an official of the investigation team. Even if you surrender, you'll still die. Then why should I surrender? Our biggest problem now is why are you so King heavy? You've clearly lost so much blood, so why are you still so King heavy? Gu Shifeng, who had been in the new 17th Division's cooking squad for 3 years, was obviously fatter than before. At this moment, he was madly running through the dense forest. Unfortunately, his madly running only had attitude but not speed. His round and thick legs were almost unable to move. Large beads of sweat dripped down his face from time to time, but he was still unable to shake off the pursuers and gunshots behind him. Da Vinci, whose face was pale, weakly said from behind, F***ck, trash is trash. Am I as heavy as you? You hide in the cooking squad and eat wild boar's feet every day. You're not afraid of the HDD Bureau in the Empire's territory. I asked you to give me 2, but you didn't want to. Gu Shifeng panted heavily and angrily said in a trembling voice, Who's the trash? You should have just died. You had to come to me with your hands on your intestines. In the end, you attracted a bunch of trash and caused the deaths of my boys. You still have the mood to rhyme leisurely. Don't you know how to use your strength on your legs? Da Vinci anxiously scolded. I've said before, don't always play with circuits. You also need to train your physical strength. Look at the old guys, who's as F***king weak as you. Gunshots rang out from behind the forest again. The white bark of the tree beside him flew, but Da Vinci did not seem to see it at all. He continued to angrily criticize. It's because the boss and old white spoiled you too much that we ended up in this situation. Nonsense, Gu Shifeng panted and retorted. However, before he could finish the second half of his sentence, he was forcefully pushed down from behind by Da Vinci, and he fell heavily onto the grass. A rocket came from the forest, and after the explosion, the grass was dyed with blood. It was as beautiful as dusk. The 3rd chapter was written the most delightfully. Comrades are not alone if they can be together, so the name Lone Army ends here. Last night, 72 said something that makes sense. Regardless of victory or defeat, as long as one is happy. Chapter 907. Gu Shifeng fell heavily on the grass, and felt something warm behind his head. He rubbed his head and looked back, only to see a terrifying crater not far behind him. Da Vinci was lying on the edge of the crater in pain. His lower body was covered in blood. Da Vinci looked at Gu Wenxi's confused expression and used all his strength to yell in pain, Run! Gu Shifeng was the only exception in Group 7. He was the best at sneaking away from the battlefield, ready to raise his gun and surrender at any time, and then look for an opportunity to shoot. Da Vinci's shout was like the sound of a starting gun on the track and field. It hurt his eardrums. He instantly returned to the battlefield of the past. His comrades, who were covered in blood, were desperately waving their arms in the midst of the gunfire, telling him to leave quickly. So, before his brain could think clearly, his body had already reacted instinctively. With a whoosh, he ran out of the grass like a fat rabbit. He stared and desperately ran forward, waving his arms desperately. His round fingers desperately scratched in the wind in the forest, but he could not catch anything. It was futile. The figure that was about to enter the dense forest suddenly stopped. Gu Shifeng turned around and began to desperately run back. Da Vinci stared at Gu Shifeng, who had run back to him, and roared angrily, Why didn't you run? Gu Shifeng looked at his legs that had been blown to pieces. His expression was extremely ugly. He seemed to want to cry but did not. He explained in a trembling voice, I can't run anymore. Da Vinci looked at him strangely as if he was looking at an idiot. He gritted his teeth and refused to let the pain in his body force him to groan for mercy. Hearing the gunshots that were getting clearer and clearer behind him, he looked at the rapid figures of the elite special forces in the forest. His chest was cold. He gasped and said, Then what do we do now? After saying this, his throat moved slightly, and he spat out blood. His face was even paler. Gu Shifeng half knelt in the grass in front of him. He wiped the sweat on his forehead and said in a trembling voice, Let's die together. Die together, my ass. Da Vinci gasped and said, When did Group 7 ever do this? Gu Shifeng's expression was a bit sluggish. After a moment, she said, I already said that I'm the special one. I don't have good stamina, so why can't I? The light in Da Vinci's eyes grew dimmer and dimmer. He knew that old Gu was right. It seemed that the two of them could only die here today. While he was waiting for death, he still could not forget the quarrel from before. He struggled to ask intermittently, You just now said nonsense. What do you mean? Gu Shifeng sat down in the grass and didn't even look at the figures of the Special Forces members who had already rushed out of the forest. She panted and said, I'm the best at electric control in Group 7. Boss and Old Bai spoil me because they value talent. It was unknown whether it was the final radiance of the setting sun or the burning of his life, but Da Vinci's breathing became much steadier. His face was extremely pale due to excessive blood loss, but he still had the mood to ridicule. He said, Back then, during the small meeting in the team, everyone wanted to invite this young master to the 7th group. If he had agreed at that time, you wouldn't have had the chance to be so arrogant. Let's see what you can be so proud of. I'm going to die. Gu Shifeng rubbed her hair in frustration and then cried in pain. Da Vinci, you're going to die too. I'm going to die too. Don't be afraid. Da Vinci lay on his back in the blood-soaked grass. With his increasingly blurred vision, he looked at the enemies who were closing in on him. He said in a low and trembling voice, Don't be afraid. Ever since I came to the West Woods, I won't be afraid anymore. A clear gunshot rang out from an unknown direction in the forest and reverberated in the air. Gu Shifeng knew that these pursuers were more cold-blooded and cruel than the people of the Empire. They would never give him any chance to pretend to surrender and shoot him in the back. Thus, when the gunshot rang out, he closed his eyes. He didn't want to use his dirty tactics against those black barrels out of habit. He didn't want to embarrass Group 7 in the last moments of his life. The gunshot rang out, reverberated, and then disappeared. It was only a very short period of time, but to Gu Shifeng, it was as long as his own life. After the incident, he even insisted that he saw all the important scenes from his birth to his death, including the first time he fired a gun on the battlefield and the first time he visited a prostitute. Why wasn't it as painful as the previous few times? Or was it because people didn't feel pain after they died? Gu Shifeng, who was holding Da Vinci's body in his arms, opened his eyes hesitantly after what he thought was a very long period of time. Then, he saw a scene that he never expected. His dry mouth opened subconsciously, but he didn't make any sound. 20 meters away, the Federation Special Forces soldier, who was aiming a Cayenne light gun at him, suddenly had a delicate and round hole appear between his eyebrows. Then, a terrifying blood-soaked flower bloomed from the hole. Bang! The clear and dull gunshot rang out from behind the forest again. Then, a second and third gunshot rang out. It was as clear as music. The few Federation Special Forces elites who were about to pull the trigger and kill Gu Shifeng and Da Vinci suddenly had countless bloody holes appear on their bodies. After a series of muffled popping sounds, their bodies trembled violently, and they fell to the ground dead. Then, a grenade dragged a long tail and flew in a crooked manner in the forest. It whistled through the air above the grass at high speed and pierced into the back of the forest like a poisonous snake. It accurately hit and instantly destroyed an armored mountain vehicle behind the forest. Su Li's left foot was in front of him, and his right foot was behind him. His body was as calm and straight as a poplar tree. The modified gun in his hands made muffled sounds with a steady rhythm. Every time there was a flash of light, a Special Forces soldier from the small-eyed Special Forces would fall to the ground in the forest. The distance wasn't too far, and the positions he chose to shoot were all focused on the heads and throats of the Special Forces soldiers. Blood kept spurting out between the eyebrows and throats of the Special Forces soldiers, and they fell like wheat that had been cut down by the muzzle of his gun. Under the big tree a few meters away, The ashen-faced Xiong Linquan had already activated the heavy gun in his hands. The whistling rain of bullets was like the fishing net of the Grim Reaper, trapping the scattered enemies within. Every time the net was pulled, a piece of flesh would be torn apart. After the team's last grenade successfully destroyed the armored mountain vehicle, this sudden battle ended. The battle ended too quickly. The few startled birds on the treetops didn't even have time to fly away. The forest quickly returned to silence. Only the bloody corpses and the burnt yellow bark on the ground proved what had happened in the short span of a dozen seconds. When the team members cleared the periphery of the forest, they captured 4 injured captives. However, at this time, no one cared about these guys. Everyone anxiously ran back to the grass, and came to Gu Shifeng and Da Vinci's side. Looking at the crying Gu Shifeng and the shocking blood on the grass, everyone's expression gradually stiffened. Chapter 908. The team members surrounded Da Vinci in silence as they looked at him lying in a pool of blood. Their hands that were holding their guns became extremely stiff. Small bubbles of blood slowly seeped out of his tattered pants, and they could even see the broken bones. His legs were probably crippled. What was more serious was that he had been shot twice in the chest and abdomen a few days ago in the camp. He had miraculously recovered during the escape, but now the wound had opened up again. Although Da Vinci had always boasted himself as the number 2 cockroach of Group 7, and although he had perfectly displayed his powerful vitality during the process of escaping alone in the forest, the heavy injuries had ultimately defeated his body and spirit. He was like a helpless pale youth, lying in Gu Shifeng's arms on the verge of death, and his eyes gradually lost their luster. The team members opened the glass screen of their individual helmets and smelled the smell of blood on the grass. They began to call Da Vinci's name, wanting to accompany him on his last journey. Xiong Linquan's face was livid. He turned around and threw his helmet away, creating a deep hole in the wet grass. However, he still could not vent the emotions in his heart at the moment. Su Lu squatted down and picked up Da Vinci's body from Gu Shifeng's arms, who was about to faint from crying. He laid him flat on the soft grass, pulled out a tourniquet from his waist, and forcefully wrapped it around Da Vinci's thighs. He then tied a knot. Su Li's movements were very fast. As soon as the knot was tied, he took out the high-efficiency hormone injection from his military backpack. He quickly tore open the outer packaging, aimed the round needle at Da Vinci's chest, and forcefully pushed it down. The hormone injection was quickly injected into Da Vinci's body. Da Vinci did not know whether it was the effect of the drug or because he felt that there were many people around him. He opened his eyes with difficulty and stared at the blurry figure beside him. He recognized Xiong Linquan's broad back purely by feeling and murmured, "Captain Xiong, I want to say my last words." Su Lu half knelt beside him and opened the medical kit. When he heard the word "last words," he slightly frowned, but his hands did not stop moving. He took out the L-shaped surgical probe. "Captain Bear, tell Gao Lu's sister, don't wait for me." Da Vinci narrowed his eyes and looked at the thick clouds in the sky that could not be seen clearly. His dry lips moved slightly and he said in a weak voice, "It's all Gao Lu's father's fault." He stubbornly refused to agree. "Otherwise, we would have married and had a son 3 years ago." Xiong Linquan turned around and squatted beside him. He held his right hand, which was full of dust and blood, and said in a deep voice, "I will pass the message to you." Monkey, Mountain Pow, and the other members of Group 7 knew the story very well. It was a story that happened at Creek 3320. Xiao Shisan sacrificed himself to save Da Vinci. Da Vinci was determined to marry his sister, but for some reason Da Vinci's father, who worked in the capital ring, did not agree. Putting down, or rather, giving up the last stone in his heart, Da Vinci's pale cheeks showed a hint of relief. However, a moment later 2 streams of tears flowed down his cheeks. He cried and said, "Her father doesn't like that I'm the son of the governor." Da Vinci grabbed Xiong Linquan's hand tightly and cried, "I'm a war hero, right? I hate those F***king politicians, corrupt officials, but my father is such a person. I hate him. Tell my mom to divorce him. Tell her that these are my last words. Mom, I miss you." Although they were all soldiers who were used to life and death on the battlefield, when they saw Da Vinci, who was usually the most unyielding, crying and calling for his mother in the face of death, many of the men on the grass still had tears in their eyes. Da Vinci's head fell to the side weakly, and then a blurry figure entered his eyes. This figure was very important to him and very familiar, but he had not seen it for a long time. "Boss? Am I seeing things or am I going to die? How can I see you?" Su Lu heard Da Vinci's muttering question, but he did not answer. At this time, he was burying his head in treating the terrible injuries on his lower body. He had just finished mixing the third blood coagulation injection and was preparing to remove the terrible shrapnel between the flesh and blood. "Da Vinci, you didn't see wrong. It's the boss. The boss is back. The boss is here to take us out of this damn place. You can't die." Shan Pao roared anxiously, and then begged Su Lu, "Boss, say something." Su Lu was still silent. He listened carefully to Da Vinci's breath, that was getting weaker and weaker. His pair of knife-like thick eyebrows became tighter and tighter, and his heart became colder and colder. In the 68th year of the constitutional calendar, the Federation government under the leadership of President Pabre began a series of operations in order to restore the glory of the 17th Division War God. In this operation, more than 100 soldiers of the Federation's nobles, who were happily gilding themselves in the 83-84 garrison unit of the port city, were secretly sent to Ceylon and began to receive Group 7's devilish training. The three demonic instructors, Su Lu, Bai Magnolia, and Xiong Linquan, left a deep impression on those children that would never be erased for the rest of their lives. It was no exaggeration to say that it changed their lives, because from then on, they were no longer the dandy children of the Federation who were ridiculed behind their back. Instead, they became members of the Federal military's illustrious group of heroes. Among those new members of the noble families, Da Vinci and Xi Ping had the best military qualities. Xi Ping couldn't get rid of her old entanglements and left Group 7 early. Da Vinci stayed and quickly showed his outstanding side, becoming the first new member to follow the old members on missions. Su Lu silently looked at Da Vinci's pale cheeks and closed eyes. He naturally recalled the sweat on the West Woods field, the liquor in the auditorium, and the blood on the battlefield. He silently paid respect to the soldiers who were about to die. His father was the governor of Xixia State, but he was just an ordinary soldier on the front line. This was not something that anyone could do. Xiong Linquan's face was ashen as he looked at Gu Shifeng and asked, "Where are the others in the camp?" Gu Shifeng retracted her shocked gaze from Su Lu and said dejectedly, "They're all dead." NTR Group's forward camp was located in an extremely remote location, and their disguise was extremely good. However, they still couldn't escape the Federation's search. A total of 200 people from the Small Eyes Special Forces took a fighter and launched a surprise attack. The camp, which only had a dozen members, was instantly destroyed. Only Gu Shifeng and Da Vinci managed to hide ahead of time. Hearing this, Xiong Linquan's face turned even uglier. He walked behind Su Lu and whispered the names of a few people who had died in the camp. Su Li's eyebrows slowly rose. Those familiar names represented fresh faces. Those names had all appeared in Group 7's roster. They were all his closest and most reliable subordinates or companions. Ever since his identity as a citizen of the Empire was made known to the world, the situation of the members of Group 7 had become awkward. Fortunately, they all had family backgrounds in the capital ring, and with the protection of the 17th Division and Teacher Yu, their days on the front line were not difficult. Until the Commander-in-Chief at the front line was replaced, The members were transferred to the most dangerous NTR group in batches and began to undergo inhuman tests again and again in the Southwest Theater. However, what was strange, or perhaps admirable, was that not a single member told the situation at the front line to their powerful parents in the rear in an attempt to be transferred away from NTR. This was because they firmly believed that the duty of a soldier was to appear on the most dangerous battlefield. If they did not go to the front line, there would naturally be other ordinary soldiers who would go to the front line. How could they cry and ask for their mothers at every turn? Even if they're retired, there are less than 30 people left. Sulu looked at the few members around him and silently calculated in his mind. When he thought of those high-ranking military officers in the Federation base, his eyebrows slowly rose. The 4 captives were escorted over. Their bodies were more or less injured, and their faces no longer had the usual arrogance and confidence, only nervousness and panic. The Small Eyes Unit, which was a military establishment but belonged to the Federation government's Joint Investigation Department, was mostly from Philadelphia. They had all undergone special training at the Philadelphia Training Hall and were abnormally strong. In their eyes, whether it was Du Shaoqing's Iron 7th Division or the new 17th Division, they were all just a mob. They never would have thought that they would be defeated so quickly and so thoroughly in the previous battle. They didn't even have time to report the situation to the headquarters at the rear before they lost in a complete mess. They were humiliated and became prisoners of war. Sulu was very clear about the origins of these Special Forces soldiers. The first person to fight these people in this world was himself. To be more precise, when the Federation's Small Eyes Unit was first established, their only purpose was to capture or kill him. He stared at the Small Eyes blood seal on the captive's shoulders and said, "You are Li Jiedu's men." The captives did not answer his question. Instead, the officer looked at Su Li's face and his expression became more and more strange. He said in shock, "You are Su Lu." After a moment, he seemed to understand something. He looked at the people around him and roared angrily, "You are indeed colluding with the people of the Empire." The officer stared into Xiong Linquan's eyes and threatened coldly, "I suggest you let us go immediately and surrender. Otherwise, you will definitely regret what you did today." The sound of a gun being loaded rang out. Xiong Linquan glared with his blood-red eyes, raised the barrel in his hand, and aimed it at the officer's forehead. He roared furiously, "I'll make you regret what you've done today." Gu Shifeng, who was being supported by Shan Pao, said in pain, "Kill them and avenge our brothers." The officer of the Small Eyes Combat Unit looked at the muzzle of the gun that was inches away from him. His face turned pale from fear, but his eyes were unusually bright. He roared forcefully, "You dare to kill the captives!" "It's not the first time I've killed them," Xiong Linquan replied in a low voice. The Small Eyes Combat Unit officer's expression changed drastically. He finally remembered that he was facing Group 7, the legendary Group 7 that dared to do anything. His gray lips trembled quickly for a moment before he screamed, "Federation people don't kill Federation people." This was a famous quote from a Federation member. Back when the West Woods was at its strongest and the internal situation of the Federation was very unstable, one of the ancestors of the Zhong family looked at the television camera and calmly said, "Federation people don't kill Federation people." Since then, no one had discussed the issue of Westwood's independence. Hearing these shameless words, Gu Shifeng spat at the officer and said with endless hatred, "Then why did you shoot at us? Federation people really shouldn't kill Federation people." Su Lu took the gun from Xiong Linquan's hand and looked at his team members who had angry expressions and the few captives from the Small Eyes Combat Unit who had complicated emotions. He paused for a moment before he raised his arm and pulled the trigger in a simple and neat manner. Pop, 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 pop. 4 crisp gunshots rang out. 4 Small Eyes Combat Unit Special Forces soldiers, with bloody holes in between their eyebrows and expressions of shock and fear, fell dead on the grass that was already covered in blood. "But I'm from the Empire," Su Lu said to the 4 corpses. Then he walked back to Da Vinci's side. With the last bit of desperation and exhaustion, he slapped Da Vinci's face and roared in a low voice, "Wake up!" Da Vinci slowly opened his eyes and woke up. In the backup camp prepared by Gu Shifeng, the team restocked some ammunition and once again set foot on the road of escape. However, this time, other than Dongfang Yu, there was also Da Vinci in the team. On the stretcher temporarily made of branches, Dongfang Yu often frowned from the jolting. Da Vinci was still in a semi-conscious state. He even convulsed when they came to Pinecone Ridge. He wasn't completely out of danger yet. Su Lu threw the device in his backpack to Gu Shifeng and told him to repair it as soon as possible. Otherwise, he wouldn't be able to contact Philip under this cloud of lead and would feel very insecure. As for himself, he was still with Xiong Linquan, acting as the main force carrying the stretcher. Gu Shifeng lived up to his reputation as the federal military's top electronic control expert. Although he had completely repaired the device, through his thick and round fingers, the team was able to listen in on a few secret communications from the Federation base. The order to kill them was no longer new. What everyone noticed was that the decisive battle by the lakeside had already been decided. The remnants of the Empire's army were scattered in a corner of the southwest war zone. The wider plains had already been completely occupied by the Federal forces. "I still feel that we should return to base and tell everyone the truth. Otherwise, there's no point in continuing to run like this, unless we really defect to the Empire's side," Dongfang Yu on the stretcher said. Su Lu frowned and said, "The key is that those people in the base won't give us a chance to speak. They don't ask us questions, only bullet. You shouldn't have been so impulsive as to kill those 4 captive." Dongfang Yu coughed painfully and said, "Now, even if I want to explain it, I won't be able to." After a moment of silence, Su Lu said, "You're not a member of Group 7. You don't understand that we rarely say anything. We're only used to doing things." The team silently walked through the fog-shrouded mountain forest. After a long period of silence, Dongfang Yu on the stretcher suddenly said in a hoarse voice, "I know a relatively safe place. It's just a matter of whether you dare to go or not." Chapter 909. Where is it? Su Lu asked. "BG Plateau." Dongfang Yu mentioned an unfamiliar place. Xiong Linquan, who was in front of the stretcher, frowned and asked, "Isn't that the radiation zone we mentioned before? It's just beside Akihabara. It's not big, only about 2,000 square kilometers. If you want to pass through Akihabara without being exposed to the military satellites, you might as well go through BG Plateau. As long as there are no problems along the way and you can successfully break into that area, then the Federation's ground forces won't pose any trouble. Because of the radiation, the Federation's ground forces have never dared to enter BG Plateau. Naturally, it's not a problem," Xiong Linquan said angrily. Xiong Linquan said angrily, "But we're not a bunch of monsters in lead jackets. The radiation itself is the biggest problem." Dongfang Yu rolled over on the stretcher with difficulty and looked at the shadow fragments of the sky formed by the leaves of the dense forest above his head. After a moment of silence he said, "Actually, Federal forces have gone in before. To be precise, there have always been Federal forces inside." Su Lu frowned and looked at him. After a moment of silence he asked, "You've gone in before?" "The 4 strongest divisions of NTR went in 2 years ago. Trust me, the radiation on the surface of the plateau is not very harmful to the human body," Dongfang Yu said indifferently. "You don't have to ask why I dared to let you go to the plateau when there are Federation troops inside. The reason is very simple. It's because the Federation troops left on the plateau are all engineers, and they should be underground." Su Lu and Xiong Linquan looked at each other. They somewhat believed Dongfang Yu's words, but they could not completely believe it. This was because after this person finished speaking, he shut his mouth tightly and refused to provide any more details, nor was he willing to talk about his experience when he went in before. In a valley, the team stopped temporarily to discuss the route forward. Su Le looked at Da Vinci, who was still unconscious, and then at Gu Shifeng, who was busy repairing the equipment. He said, "Our destination is now the Golan Highlands, which is close to the Straits war zone. I can't explain why I chose that highland for the time being, but I believe it's the best choice. For the past 3 years, the entire Mo Hua planet had been a battlefield. Now, this small team had no base or backup. Everywhere they looked, they were surrounded by enemies. They were in a desperate situation and did not know where to go. Needless to say, their trust in Su Lu was so firm and even blind that nobody remembered that he was a citizen of the Imperium. Even if any one of them were to offer an opinion, they would probably all agree. The problem now is how to get there. The original plan was to force our way through the foothills of Autumn Leaf Field, but this path is very dangerous, especially after we pass through the lead cloud electronic shield. The base can discover our position at any time. We are carrying 2 seriously injured people, so it is impossible for us to move too quickly." Su Le continued. "Dongfang just gave a suggestion. The team will go directly from Autumn Leaf Plain to the Biji Plateau, and then go through the tundra to reach the Golan Highlands. This route is easier to take, but you should have heard that the Biji Plateau has abnormal radiation. The Federal forces and the Imperium don't dare to enter." Then, he repeated Dongfang Yu's reasoning. The team members fell silent, each thinking. At this moment, Gu Shifeng suddenly stopped repairing the equipment and looked up at Su Lu. "According to the records, the Imperium has been migrating to Mo Hua planet for several thousand years. The Baijin dynasty's mining of graphite began fully 600 years ago. If the radiation of the highlands is as Dongfang said, and not as serious as what the military said, then why has the Imperium not dared to enter? Why did they leave the rich graphite or under the highlands alone?" Gu Shifeng looked at Dongfang Yu on the stretcher and said, "I'm not suspecting that your suggestion has any evil intentions, but I think it doesn't make sense logically." Faced with everyone's questioning gazes, Dongfang Yu said with an expressionless voice, "I can't explain it, but speaking of logic, the Imperium's people have always been creatures without logic. They are very afraid of the Biji Plateau, but in the Imperium's language, they call that Plateau Futian. This is also very difficult to explain. So, I'm a creature without logic. No wonder Professor Lin was so disappointed in my theoretical physics and mathematics standards back then." Su Lu thought to himself in a self-deprecating manner. Then, he looked up at everyone and said, "Since that's the case, we'll follow the edge of Autumn Leaf Plains. That dry water dividing line is at the edge of the lead clouds, so it's relatively safe. If we encounter a large force of the Federation or an extremely dangerous situation, we'll immediately retreat to the highlands." After confirming their destination and route, the team, who had been through hundreds of battles, had a rare moment of relaxation. This was especially so after crossing Pine Cone Ridge for the second time, where they had unexpectedly captured 4 scattered Imperium soldiers. Due to their lack of manpower, they could actually take turns carrying the stretcher. However, words like relaxation and joy could not accompany people's escape forever. On the contrary, in all sorts of adventure novels, escape was always a synonym for bad luck. Therefore, less than 4 hours after the team set foot on Autumn Leaf Plains, they encountered a reinforced Federation company at a mountain pass shrouded in a thin layer of fog. Not every sudden battle would have a sudden and perfect ending like the previous few. There were less than 10 people left in the team who could fight, and they still had to monitor the 4 Imperium prisoners responsible for carrying the stretcher. Suddenly encountering a reinforced company of more than 120 people, they were immediately suppressed to the point where they couldn't even raise their heads. Danger surrounded them. Through the thin fog, Su Li's expression was extremely grim as he looked at the Federation soldiers moving toward the cliff. From time to time, bullets whistled past his head and pierced deeply into the hard black cliff. The shrapnel that shot out struck his back and caused him a burning pain. A muffled explosion came from the west. The explosives set by Gu Shifeng and the near-perfect geomechanics calculation once again played a crucial role. Hundreds of tons of rocks rolled down from the mountain stream, accurately and dangerously brushing against the highlands as they roared down. They heavily smashed into the west side of the mountain path and shook the entire valley. The team was currently controlling a cliff with excellent terrain. Looking down from above, with the help of the thin fog, it wasn't difficult to defend. After the rocks blocked the enemy's path of attack from the west, they didn't feel too much of a problem. However, battle was not a game of chess. Everyone, including Su Lu, knew that with just these cliffs and rocks, there was no way they could stop the attacks of a reinforced Federation company. Although the enemy didn't have mecha, their firepower was too strong. Therefore, they had to retreat as quickly as possible. However, Monkey, who was in charge of finding a path, still hadn't replied. "We need to hold on for at least 2 more minutes." Xiong Linquan crawled to Su Li's side and shouted amidst the dense gunfire, "We need to find a path that the heavily injured can pass through. We can't hold on anymore." Su Lu casually fired a shot at the bottom of the cliff. Looking at the clear and organized fan-shaped attack formation of the reinforced Federation company, he said in a low voice, "There are too few shooting points. We can't form a suppressive fire net." They didn't know which division the Federation company at the bottom of the cliff belonged to, but after knowing their identity, they fired without any hesitation. They were even more resolute and certain than when they were shooting at the Empire people. This bravery made Xiong Linquan and the others extremely angry. They were all Federation people. If they could avoid fighting, that would be for the best. Even if they were forced to fight by their superiors, did they really have to fight so viciously? Amidst the dense gunfire, there were occasional grunts from the team members. Although there weren't many of them, considering the advantage of the terrain they controlled and the number of people they had, it was clear that this battle was going to be very tragic. Xiong Linquan knew that Su Lu was right. If they wanted to form an effective suppressive fire net, they had enough guns and ammunition, but they didn't have enough people. Thinking of this, his gaze couldn't help but fall on the captives of the Empire, and his brows furrowed tightly. There was a gap in the cliff that looked like a natural trench. Da Vinci and Dongfang Yu were both heavily injured, and Su Lu, Xiong Linquan, and Gu Shifeng were all here. Noticing Xiong Linquan's gaze, Su Lu knew what he was hesitating about. He pursed his lips tightly and didn't say anything. Gu Shifeng, however, directly shouted, "Don't hesitate. Hurry up and give them the guns. At this time, everyone is going to die. They won't betray us." Dongfang Yu angrily stared into Xiong Linquan's eyes and struggled to sit up. However, he fell heavily back onto the stretcher and roared with a hoarse voice, "You dare! If you give the guns to the Empire people to kill our own comrades, I'll kill you." Gu Shifeng glared at him and roared back, "Look clearly! It's our comrades who are trying to kill us at all costs. I don't want to King die like this." Dongfang Yu continued to roar angrily. Xiong Linquan didn't say anything. He just silently opened his weapon bag, took out the guns, and threw them to the 4 nervous and frustrated Empire prisoners. Then, he handed one to Paul, who was behind Su Lu, and said in a deep voice, "Do what you did when you were in the army." Throughout the entire process, Xiong Linquan didn't ask for Su Li's permission. He didn't even look at him because he knew that he could only make this difficult decision. After Paul took the gun, he ran to the fire control point on the south side without hesitation. He lay down on the cliff and began to steadily shoot down. After the other 4 Empire prisoners received the guns, they were stunned for a long time before they reacted. They walked to their positions in shock and started to shoot together. This team, which was already extremely complicated to begin with, became even more indescribable. The sounds of gunfire on the cliff suddenly became dense. The war heroes of the Federation and the Empire prisoners held the same guns and interacted like comrades. They covered each other and made all kinds of simple tactical gestures. They even began to worry about each other's safety. They came from different planets and belonged to different races that had been hostile to each other for many years. But now they came together for the same purpose and began to fight side by side. The purpose was very simple. It wasn't for the glory of their race, the rise and fall of their country, or hatred. It wasn't for the interests that the merchants valued the most. It was just for survival. Half an hour later, the team that had retreated to the edge of the plateau rested on the spot. In the gloomy twilight, Sulu looked at the team that had shrunk in number, looked at the team members in ragged clothes, looked at the nervous captives of the Imperium, and felt the suffocating atmosphere. Therefore, he repeated the following words in the Federal language and the Imperium's language twice. In front of us is the Biji Plateau, which is also known as Fujian in the Empire language. There may be dangerous radiation on the plateau, or there may be happy springs. But since we're all together, fate must have made the most suitable arrangement. Then let us live together or die together. Chapter 9-10. 10 days was a long plot. There were many points that I liked, many points that I had prepared for a long time, and many parts that I would get excited when I looked at the outline. I liked Lin Banshan's phone, Lin Banshan's shoulders, Lin Banshan's arrogance, Lin Banshan's gifts, and him as a person. I liked the picture that the female anchor received. I liked that the president in the picture was a man of character. I liked the dark horse head on the bed. I liked that the director who received the dark horse head was a fan of the Godfather's novels. I liked the old clockmaker and the young girl, Azula. That was the feeling of the City of War that the parrot wrote down in Shurhang's excerpt. Although it was short, it had to have some. I liked the old clockmaker's words. A happy person only needed to do one thing, and that was to live. I liked that whether it was Xiong Linquan or Su Lo, both of them accidentally helped the Empire's young girl, who had the right and reason to live, and really lived. Of course, I liked the reunion of Su Lu and Group 7 the most. I was really happy to write that chapter. New wine in an old bottle. I've said it many times before. This time it was the first time. Why did Xiao Feng have to stab himself in the chest with an arrow and fight with the old brothers of the beggar sect? I didn't want to. I also liked how Gu Shifeng and Da Vinci had gone through life and death together. To be honest, I had been accumulating murderous intent for the past 10 days just to kill Da Vinci. After thinking about it, I decided to stand on the side of the people and let Su Lu slap him awake. Yes, there were already too many deaths in our world. There were also too many stories of spies. It would be warmer if this son of a governor who had yet to marry Gao Lu's sister didn't die. There was no need to say much about promises and bet. Compared to the hard-working writers beside me, if I dared to say that I was tired, I would be showing my cheap side and asking for a beating. But I have always been confident that I have a good character, and I spent 2 years seriously writing this story. I am very satisfied that I didn't waste my life. I will take a short break, and then I may stop writing. When I come back, I will continue to work on this story with you. In a few more days, I will end these 2 years. At such a sour time, do I still need to ask for monthly votes? Yes, I still want monthly vote. Good night, people of the spies. Good night, people of the spies. Casually written, it's 2F** King emotional. How ridiculous. But the chapter title is still beautiful. Chapter 9-11. The exhausted team walked on the Biji Plateau in the early morning. Behind them were patches of light yellow grass, a sea of black gravel, a dry riverbed, and the bones of dead beasts. Just as Dong Fangyu had predicted, the radiation detector's index was indeed on the high side, but it didn't exceed what the human body could withstand. This was a very fortunate thing. Another fortunate thing was that due to the existence of this radiation, neither the Federation nor the Empire had sent any ground troops to this wasteland. As for whether or not there were any engineering mechs digging into the depths of the plateau, that was something they didn't know yet. For the people, the real danger now was the blazing sun. Not long after dawn, the high temperature instantly forced out the moisture in the human body. Then there was the somewhat unfamiliar sky without a trace of cloud. The bright light from the blue dome sprinkled down like a curtain of water, and when it came into contact with the black gravel ground, it was slightly distorted in the nearby area, shrouding the scene in front of them with a layer of unreality. Xiong Linquan reached out and wiped the line of salt on his chin. Panting, he looked at a shallow tunnel entrance a few hundred meters in front of him and ordered with a hoarse voice, "Everyone, enter." In order to delay the detection of the Federation's military satellites as much as possible, and to guard against attacks from the sky, their team had chosen to hide during the day and move out at night after entering the plateau. After dawn, they had to find a mining pit where they could hide in the shortest amount of time possible. Although the radiation index in the mining pit was higher, it was still bearable. Furthermore, they had to take this risk. Otherwise, if a random Federation fighter jet came, the entire team would die on this barren plateau. This abandoned mining pit was obviously not in use for long. The alloy supporting structure in the tunnel was still shining after the dust on the surface was wiped away. Su Lu narrowed his eyes and looked at the smooth surface of the metal under his finger, deep in thought. After a moment of silence, he turned around and looked at the extremely tired team members and said, "Everyone, hold on for 2 more days. As soon as we reach the Golan Highlands, there will be a ship coming to pick us up." After entering the plateau with Gu Shifeng's help, he had made a few intermittent contacts with Philip, who was outside the atmosphere. They had discussed a plan to evacuate Mo Hua planet, so he was more confident. "You have to promise that it's not the Empire's ship," Dongfang Yu said with a hoarse voice as he stared at his face. "I promise it's definitely not the Empire's ship," Su Lu replied. Gu Shifeng was giving Da Vinci and 4 drip when she suddenly turned around and asked curiously, "Boss, is that the ship that was so arrogant that it raised its middle finger in the capital city?" "Yes," Su Lu replied with a smile. He then threw his military backpack to Paul and sat down beside Dongfang Yu's stretcher. He looked at her silently and didn't say anything for a long time. Silence usually represented a very clear attitude, but Xiong Linquan was obviously more willing to choose a more direct approach. He stared at Dongfang Yu's face and said, "This plateau, radiation, and these obviously new mine tunnels. Dongfang, do you still have something to say?" Dongfang Yu was silent for a very long time, and then coughed painfully twice. He shook his head and said, "I don't know much. I only know that there should be some kind of strange mineral vein under the plateau's shallow layer of graphite. I've never seen or even heard of the ore produced there before. I only know that it contains very strong harmful radiation." Perhaps because he had recalled some very unpleasant memories, his eyebrows furrowed tightly, and he said hoarsely, "More than 2 years ago, NTR was responsible for escorting engineering mecha into this plateau. Because it was a top-secret mission, none of you know about it. In fact, the team I led back then had taken sufficient anti-radiation measures, but after the mission, 2 of the team members still contracted severe radiation sickness. I heard that they died not long after boarding the ship." "The radiation is so strong? What is that?" The team members turned to look at Su Lu in shock. They were used to looking for answers directly from him when they encountered such questions. There are many natural radioactive elements in the universe, but those that can form mineral veins are relatively rare. But the way I see it, the crux of the problem is why the Federation wants to mine this kind of mineral vein. What is their goal? I don't know. Those who were able to come back alive from underground have all signed confidentiality agreements. Besides, I think that my luck is already good enough, so I don't want to ask these questions. Dongfang Yu frowned and replied, but there is one thing I can remind you of. This mission was directly ordered by the Department of Defense. It didn't even go through the headquarters. At the time, Du Shaoqing was still the commander. In the entire federal military, there was only one person who could bypass him on planet Mo Hua. Su Lu shook his head and said, but since you know about this matter, doesn't Du Shaoqing have any doubts about it? Others don't dare to ask Li Jiedu, but he definitely does. I said before that I signed a confidentiality agreement. Besides, I'm no longer a direct subordinate of the commander. According to the commander's teachings, I can't report to him above my rank. Xiong Linquan threw away the cigarette butt in his hand and said mockingly, like person, like soldier. I wonder if Du Shaoqing regrets teaching you so rigidly. The discussion about the strange radioactive mineral vein under the Biji Plateau did not go any further. For this fugitive team, their most important and only mission right now was to survive and board the ship that was coming to pick them up. The federal military upper echelons, or to be more precise, General Li Jiedu, had given the order to excavate this mineral, was not a question that they had the energy and ability to think about right now. Even if they had a strong sense of justice and decided to maintain the peace of the universe, there was no way they could go deep into the plateau in this exhausted and broken state. Is it a new type of alternative energy source or something? Su Lu walked to the end of the deep tunnel and looked at the slightly wet rock wall. The suspicion that had just appeared in his heart was immediately overthrown. According to the radiation intensity described by Dongfang Yu, it would be very difficult to turn this mineral into a stable and reliable energy source. Sitting down next to the stretcher, he looked at Da Vinci, who was still in a semi-conscious state. Sensing his increasingly long and steady breathing, he couldn't help but narrow his eyes. Why did he not feel any discomfort in such a low-intensity radiation environment? On the contrary, he even felt somewhat comfortable? It was hard to describe the feeling. The weak invisible radiation in the rock wall was like layers of warm waves that wrapped around his body, making every cell in his body excited from the inside out. After a moment of silence, he held Da Vinci's wrist softly and adjusted his breathing to be longer and gentler. He slowly released the magical burning power that was spreading out from a certain part of his back and carefully transmitted it to Da Vinci's body through his arm. He did not know if it would work, but a thought flashed in his mind that he wanted to try it. Maybe it was because the radiation in the tunnel was too warm. Chapter 9:12. In the abandoned mine tunnel, warmth flowed through the walls. Da Vinci, who had been in a semi-conscious state, gradually began to show some miraculous changes in his body. His pale cheeks suddenly became rosy, like a dried apple that had suddenly survived the double torture of time and air, becoming fresh again. Su Lu closed his eyes and frowned, not noticing this change. He continued to slowly and cautiously inject the miraculous energy into Da Vinci's body. Da Vinci's face became paler and paler, and his left shoulder began to tremble uncontrollably. It was extremely difficult. The team members who had been quietly resting noticed the situation and dragged their tired bodies over. When Xiong Linquan's palm landed on Su Li's shoulder, he suddenly opened his eyes and woke up. He smiled with difficulty and said, "I hope he can hold on. Da Vinci's appearance is a bit strange." Xiong Linquan frowned as he looked at the stretcher. Why does it feel like he's more energetic? Among the supplies at the edge of the forest, there was a considerable amount of medicine. Hearing Xiong Linquan's words, the team members hurriedly tore open the bags and replaced the medicine that was being injected into Da Vinci's body. Drip, drip, drip. The team members stared with wide eyes at the medicine that was silently dripping from the soft infusion tube. Their expressions were extremely serious and nervous. Everyone knew that this was a critical moment. If Da Vinci could withstand the strong stimulation of the hormone medicine and withstand the pressure in his blood vessels and wake up, then his life would be saved. If he couldn't wake up, then it would be very difficult for him to wake up in the future. After an unknown amount of time, the imperial soldier in the corner of the mine saw the index finger of the hand beside the stretcher tremble slightly. He cried out in shock. Then, to everyone's delight, Da Vinci, who had been unconscious for many days, finally opened his eyes and woke up. Someone dimmed the light to avoid irritating his eyes. Da Vinci looked at the blurry face in front of him in frustration and exhaustion. He probably knew that he was still alive. His ash-gray lips curled up with difficulty and squeezed out a smile. At this time, Gu Shifeng stopped repairing the equipment. She used her round fingers to hold a pair of thin tweezers and dipped them in some water. She carefully wiped away the dry debris at the corner of his eyes. She could not hide her joy and fear. She laughed and scolded him. "You really are the number 2 cockroach of Group 7. The cockroach was the symbol of a cockroach in the traditional culture of the military camp. It represented an incredible vitality and would not die no matter what." Hearing this description, the pale-faced Da Vinci smiled tiredly. His throat made some noises, but he could not say a complete syllable. Su Lu had already retreated to a corner and was wiping the sweat on his forehead with a towel. Previously, he had injected his true qi into Da Vinci's body purely as a subconscious reaction. He didn't expect that it would actually have some effect. He was pleasantly surprised. Hearing the word cockroach, he recalled the stories that Philip had once told him about the transformation of the 3 planets in the capital ring by the previous generation of human civilization. He could not help but smile. The earliest biological library was indeed comprehensive. Even such a small thing was not left out. Paul and the 3 imperial captives were in another corner of the mine. In the last battle before entering the Biki Plateau, they had also lost one person. The Empire and the Federation had been fighting for many years, and the hatred between them was difficult to eliminate. Although they had fought side by side with these Federation people, and although Su Lu had said before entering the plateau that this was the arrangement of fate and that everyone was destined to live or die together, the 2 sides were still subconsciously divided into 2 parts and rarely communicated with each other. Looking at the lively scene, Paul lowered his voice and translated for his companions. Probably because they felt that it was difficult to understand why the Federation people regarded such ugly things as cockroaches as sacred, several of the Empire people could not help but laugh. The tunnel was very warm, and the atmosphere was very good because of the occasional laughter. Paul looked at that area and hesitated for a moment before breaking the long silence between the 2 sides. He asked Xiong Linquan in choppy Federation language, "Then, who is the number 1 cockroach? The number 1 cockroach of Group 7? The Federation soldiers laughed and pointed to Su Lu in a tacit agreement. Xiong Linquan smiled and replied, "Of course it's the boss. This guy seems to be unable to die no matter what kind of desperate situation he encounters. As the most fearless stone, he probably would not be willing to find trouble with death." Su Lu shrugged in front of everyone's eyes, tacitly agreeing with this statement, but he did not have the strength to take advantage of this rare harmonious atmosphere to say anything more. At this time, he just felt extremely tired and hungry, as if he had returned to the battlefield of the past. As long as he squeezed out all the true energy in his body, he would turn into a gluttonous monster. "Find something to eat." He looked at Paul and said, "I'm so hungry right now that I can swallow a mech." At this moment, Pearl's low and excited voice sounded from the battlefield infantry communication system. She, who was patrolling around the camp, found something interesting. "Boss, you have to come over. I found a few mechs." The starlight on the plateau was a little strange. When it fell on the gray protective suits of Su Lu and the others, it was suffused with a strange purple, and when it fell on the black gravel, it suddenly disappeared without a trace. Sulu lifted his helmet and looked at the two charred and damaged military mechs and a large excavation engineering mech in front of him. He was not shocked or disappointed by the degree of damage. In fact, before he came out, he knew very well that a mech that would be abandoned by the federal military definitely would not have much repair value. Of course, the so-called repair value here was the concept of normal mech repair and did not necessarily include him, the main designer of the MX mech. Thus, he did not hesitate to walk towards the 3 piles of metal garbage and began to climb up. The army can't leave the military MX to the Empire people. Since it did not self-destruct, it means that it has been judged to be of no repair value, or even possible to repair. An NTR team member said disappointedly. He had always been in charge of mech repair work in his original army and was very trusted. However, today, he found that his judgment was not supported by anyone. Everyone, including Pearl and Mountain Pow, was looking nervously at Sulu, who was pulling something out of the mech wreckage. After a moment of puzzlement, they remembered Su Li's identity and immediately shut their mouths. The repair arm is good. Both arms are good. Su Lu stood up straight on the mech wreckage, both hands holding up a miniature repair arm. He shouted loudly at the team members below, looking as excited as a savage who had picked up a large bone. "Can you repair it?" Mountain Pow asked loudly. Sulu put down the repair arm in his hands, patted his butt and rubbed his hands together. He said with a smile, "I'll try." "Won't they notice if you make too much noise?" Pearl pointed at the night sky. Chapter 9:13. Like stone sculptures that had been eroded by the wind for many years, the 2 military MX mechas and 1 engineering drilling mecha lay quietly and sorrowfully on the plateau. The auxiliary wings behind the mecha had completely fallen off and were nowhere to be seen. The alloy plate track outside the left mechanical leg was broken. The fire control firmware in the hidden door of Block 41 had clearly been cut in two by the alloy blade. The auxiliary balance instrument had failed. The infrared auxiliary capture system was like the lower half of a transvestite, slumped between the abdomen. When Sulu began to repair the broken mecha on the plateau, in just a short 10 seconds, he discovered so many seemingly unsolvable problems. The upper bodies of the 2 charred mecha were even more wretched. The main infrared sensors had flipped out of their shells, glowing like fruit juice. The SCC global monitoring system and large radius high-sensitivity radar on the neck and chest area were severely damaged. What was even more frightening was that the twin engines behind the mecha's waist could no longer be seen. The Z4 electron jet in the mid-upper storage room was twisting and turning like the electronic particles it had originally contained. There was no way to repair such a serious problem, which was why the NTR repair soldier from before had been dejectedly sentenced to death. Sulu frowned as he watched for a long time. The miniature mechanical repair arm in his hand began to turn. The low humming sound spread out for tens of meters in the darkness of the wasteland, disappearing as the dark yellow grass and black gravel rubbed against each other. The low humming sound of the rotating motor, the crisp clanging of metal, and the ear-piercing sound of metal rubbing against each other. Once it started, it did not stop for a long time. Pearl and the other members of Mountain Cannon watched the busy figure on the mecha nervously. From time to time, they would pass various parts according to his instructions. As the repair process progressed, layer by layer, luck began to envelop all the fugitive. The 3 mecha were like 3 severely disabled people. The one without arms had legs, and the one with a head injury had healthy legs. The so-called piecing together, or rather making up for each other, happened in this way. The darkness of the night faded away, and the morning sun gradually rose. When the light on the BG plateau was still dim, the exhausted Sulu wiped the sweat off his forehead and entered the cockpit under the expectant gazes of his team members. He groped around in the dark and found the left control stick. His fingers quickly pressed the 17 intact quick touch buttons and completed the Start Group Action command. Su Li's lips curled into a smile. 3 days later, in the Biji Plateau, a fierce battle was taking place. This was what Su Lu and the others had expected, but they didn't expect this day to come so quickly. The airborne missiles danced in the air, and then turned into countless deathly gray and black flowers that bloomed on the black plains, forming a large circle that surrounded the lone team. The high-speed machine artillery shells were like countless sharp blades, simply and directly splitting open the dry earth. Occasionally, they would hit the center of the circle, smashing viciously against the tough alloy armor, making dull and terrifying thuds. The 4 Federal close-air Greyhawk fighter jets soared through the blue sky at high speed like ferocious birds. They wantonly unleashed cannon fire, completely overturning a certain temporary tunnel camp of the lone army. They looked so insufferably arrogant. However, upon closer inspection, one would discover that the attacks of these 4 close-air Greyhawk fighter jets were actually very careful. They were trying their best to increase the distance between them and the ground. Because of this kind of careful combat posture, the seemingly fierce firepower against the ground appeared to be very scattered, and those bullets that could hit the target were ineffective. Because within the lone team, there was a dark black, clumsy, bloated, and even strange mecha. This was a monster that didn't look like an MX, nor did it look like an engineering mecha. Its left and right were extremely unbalanced, and its mobility was severely reduced. It only had a seemingly strong body, but it was like a stupid boar twisting its muddy butt. However, such an ugly mech that had been pieced together was able to bitterly hold on under the attacks of the 4 close-range combat aircraft. It protected its team members who were trying to hide below. The modified Darlin's autocannon on its left mechanical arm had even formed a powerful anti-air firepower. Pay attention to concealment. 6 o'clock. Mecha crouch. From time to time, Su Li's quick but still calm orders rang out in the individual soldier system. Under his command, the small team of more than 10 people cooperated with the clumsy mecha, dodging in near-perfect synchronization. Amidst the cloud of dust and the whistling of bullets, they remained unscathed. It was only at this moment that most of the people, including Xiong Linquan, finally understood why Su Lu had insisted on bringing this clumsy, pieced-together piece of trash with them when they had thought that it had no combat ability at all, even at the expense of slowing down the team's advance. That was because when faced with an aerial attack, there was no other mecha, not even the most advanced intact MX mecha, that could protect everyone's lives better than this crappy metal monster. But being attacked without end, unable to mount an effective counterattack, the lone team could only walk step by step towards death. Even though they could almost see the dejected and anxious faces of those 4 Federation pilots in their minds, the people fighting desperately on the ground still felt a chill run through their bodies. 20 kilometers to the south. 4 of them. About an entire company. I'm guessing it's small eyes people. In the dim cockpit, Gu Shifeng glared at the global surveillance system that had just been repaired by her chubby fingers. She looked at the clear dots of light. Like a woman who was about to be raped, she screamed helplessly and angrily. Targets that had been tracked by the glory of the Charter could not hide, and targets that had been locked down by the Federation Air Force could not escape. Right now, the assault force from the base was about to arrive. Hearing Gu Shifeng's message, the team members, who were already extremely cold, suddenly became even more nervous. Even the few Empire soldiers who did not understand the Federation language seemed to feel the intent of death in this dry world. Gu Shifeng stared expectantly at Su Li's face beside her. Su Li's face was expressionless, but his heart could not calm down. Earlier, when he had contacted Philip, he had not found a feasible method. Faced with this situation, he had no other ideas. Where could they retreat to? No, this lone team had no place to retreat to. Su Lu stared at the roaring mecha in the sky through the SCC. He looked at the group of armed robots in the distant horizon that was about to become visible. He licked his lips. Right at this moment, a sharp alarm suddenly sounded in the dim cockpit. Su Li's brows furrowed. He did not understand where the alarm was coming from. Could it be that there was an even more despairing unknown danger before this hopeless situation? A terrifying tremor suddenly descended upon the BG plateau. The crappy assembled mecha froze on the spot, and then fell forward heavily. The team members beside the thick mechanical legs were thrown into the air with pale faces. Smoke and dust covered the entire area, covering the world. Chapter 9:14. A sudden earthquake descended on the BG plateau. The wrath unleashed by the Creator when he occasionally raised his eyes brought endless disasters to the world. The entire world instantly changed its color and appearance. Even the human beings with the most cutting-edge technology, the soldiers with the strongest willpower, and the experts with the most extraordinary abilities couldn't resist this terrifying power. They could only search for a safe place in the smoke and dust in fear and uneasiness, shouting for their companions in vain. The tremors that were equivalent to the detonation of countless explosives at the same time swept from the depths of the plateau to the surface. In only a short time, they had turned the black, hot gravel into soft biscuits and turned the vast land into a garbage dump. For the army, the most terrifying thing was not the power of the tremors, but the electromagnetic interference that raged in the air and on the ground like a storm at the beginning of the earthquake. A few screams of panic rang out in the systems of the 4 federations Sparrowhawk. Then, no sound could be heard anymore. The grayish-black streamlined fuselage flipped helplessly in the air and crashed into the ground like a sparrowhawk after being shot, turning into a few clusters of flames and alloy structural fragments that filled the sky. The helicarrier that flew over from the horizon was like a drunkard who had too much to drink in the violent and tangible smoke and the invisible but even more violent electromagnetic turbulence. It managed to hold on for a while, but in the end its legs couldn't help but give way, and it fell into the garbage dump in a sorry state. There were faint sounds of explosions. In the black smoke, it was unknown how much damage the helicarrier had suffered. It was also unknown how many of the elite soldiers of the small-eyed special forces on the helicarrier had died in a foreign land because of the earthquake. In a deep valley at the edge of the BG plateau, the night that was usually starry and cloudless was now gray. No matter where one looked, it was the same, boundless and without any sense of direction. The dusty Su Lu couldn't care less about his dry and bleeding lip. He forced himself to support his exhausted body and counted the number of people in the team with the help of the night vision lights with Xiong Linquan. In the end, they confirmed that everyone was still alive. The two of them looked at each other and couldn't hide the luck and fear in their eyes. There were no buildings or giant rocks on the plateau, and the Federation's attack force was destroyed by the electromagnetic turbulence. At the most dangerous moment, Philip played a guiding role. But even with these conditions, the fact that this lone army, which had survived hundreds of battles, could walk out of the earthquake zone unscathed and come to this valley could only be described as a miracle. It was definitely not accurate to say that they were unscathed. All of the team members had various wounds on their bodies and faces. Da Vinci, who had just woken up, fell into a coma again and started to have a fever. Dongfangyu, on the other hand, struggled to climb down from the stretcher at the critical moment and insisted on walking. The wound on her chest and abdomen tore open again, and blood oozed out at a terrifying rate. However, at least everyone was still alive. Even that stupid mech that had been repaired or put together at the last minute didn't fall apart, persevering until they reached the valley. If it wasn't for this earthquake, all of us would have to die here today. Xiong Linquan slowly and seriously chewed on the 4th last cigarette. Then, he slowly raised his head and stared at Su Li's ordinary face with an extremely serious and even somewhat strange gaze. His face was so ordinary that it was unusual because it was still so ordinary under such circumstances. Xiong Linquan said in a hoarse voice, "Boss, did the Creator really favor you?" Don't use the word favor, Su Lu frowned and criticized. His throat was very painful. With every word he said, he could feel the blood coming out from his throat due to the friction between his vocal cords. He didn't know if it was because he had breathed in too much smoke, or because he had called for his team members to report their position too many times during the earthquake. However, he was very sure that today's earthquake was just a small probability event. It wasn't because the Creator had a special favor for him. If he had to say that this kind of luck was wearing a holy cloak, then it would be better to say that Philip, who was on the spaceship, used his powerful calculation and analysis ability to point out a path for the team to cross the Dead Sea. Although this path was full of thorns, flowers bloomed at the end. Xiong Linquan was silent for a moment before he said in a hoarse voice, "I don't want to die in the hands of my own people. The earthquake can only help us cover our tracks for a while. We're going to the Golan Highlands tomorrow. I feel that it's very dangerous there." Su Lu used an even more hoarse voice to reply, "The spaceship that comes to pick us up must quietly avoid the Federal Fleet and the ground's anti-air network. According to my calculations, the Golan Highlands is the best place to land. That highland is far away from the Federation's main battle zone. As long as we calculate the time accurately enough, we can get on the spaceship before the base can react." Thinking about the danger that Xiong Linquan was worried about, he slowly narrowed his eyes and said softly, "There's something you should know first. According to the results of my calculations, if the base finds our tracks tomorrow, then they will definitely send the retreating mecha squad from the Straits War Zone to try and kill us in one fell swoop. Because it's closer." Xiong Linquan frowned and asked, "Other than that, it's also because they're stronger." Su Li's expression suddenly became extremely relaxed. He looked at him and smiled. "It's Madman Li's personal mecha battalion." Hearing the name Madman Li, Xiong Linquan was stunned for a moment. He angrily spat out the bitter ashes in his mouth onto the ground. He glanced at Su Lu and couldn't help but shake his head. As one of the most outstanding officers in the Federation, Xiong Linquan knew very well what kind of awe-inspiring military ability that young officer called Madman Li had. Although the other was still only a colonel, he was far from being an expert that he could contend against. According to the information that Gu Shifeng had eavesdropped on, this battle in the Straits had been single-handedly commanded by this person. He was the continuation of the glory of the Lees of Philadelphia's military god. He had the reputation of being unrivaled in the entire military camp at the age of 16. The mottled golden stars that represented the number of enemies he had killed had long filled the two strong mechanical legs of Zhanshi. He was an unparalleled expert on par with the Empire's Princess Huaichaosher. Yes, their most powerful leader had once defeated the other. At the very least, his strength was definitely not weaker than that madman's. However, could it be that they would expect their leader to operate that crappy compatible machine to go against the most advanced MXD controlled by Madman Li? The earthquake was a blessing bestowed by the heavens. It was a myth. If Xiong Linquan hoped that Su Lu could still defeat Madman Li in this state, and that the team could still escape from this hopeless situation, then it was no longer a myth, but a joke. Su Lu noticed Xiong Linquan's slight shaking of his head and knew what he was thinking. However, a gentle smile hung on the corners of his dry and bloodied lips. Thinking that after leaving the valley tomorrow, he might see that guy's violent and proud figure, his mood became somewhat strange. He was not anxious but abnormally calm. "I understand him." Su Lu stood up, patted Xiong Linquan's shoulder and said, "So I can deal with him." Reporting 3 things to everyone. First, I have returned to my hometown in Hubei. I have just arrived, and the updates in the next few days will still be very unstable and terrible. It is very likely that I will not be able to update tomorrow, so please do not wait. I am returning to my hometown because I have important matters to attend to. I will not explain my personal matters, so please bear with me. Third, I recommend a book by a beautiful female author called Rebirth in the Human World. To be honest, I have not read it yet, but the word count is definitely enough to kill. Please support me. There are 2 more books to be released tomorrow and the day after. Chapter 9:15. After entering the tunnel, Xiong Linquan told his concerns and Su Li's analysis to the team members. The stone walls that were darker than the valley began to fill with an oppressive and tense atmosphere. The team members' expressions were very heavy. From time to time, they looked up and seemed to inadvertently glance at Su Li's figure. They knew very well that if the lone army was intercepted by Colonel Li Feng's mecha battalion before boarding the spaceship, the remaining 1 in 1,000 survival rate would all be on the boss. After the Empire people in the team heard Paul's analysis in a low voice, their faces full of thick beards were full of panic. They were even more frightened than the team members because until now, they still didn't know the true identity of Su Lo, but they knew very well how terrifying the Federation officer named Madman Li was. The dim backlight flickered slightly. An Empire person held his head in despair, and cursed a few words in the Empire language with a Northern Star region accent. They fought for a long time on this meat-grinder-like Mo Hua planet and were defeated by the lake. Then, they were inexplicably captured by this Federation team. After a series of battles, they entered the plateau and encountered earthquakes, but in the end, they still couldn't get rid of the shadow of death. However, this was already deep into the actual control area of the federal military. Other than desperately running with this Federation team and hoping that the goddess of luck who was laughing more and more at them, what else could they do? The Imperial soldier who buried his head between his knees spoke faster and faster. His hoarse voice suddenly became sharp, and then, without any warning, it turned into a roar mixed with crying. His thin and weak shoulders kept trembling, and tears dripped down from his dirty beard. Shan Pao and several other Federation soldiers stared at the corner in shock and vigilance. Their palms slowly moved to the side of their guns. They didn't want to become the victims of stray bullets at this critical moment because of an Empire brat's mental breakdown. He's cursing the Empire military department and the big and small nobles in his hometown. Well, he's just cursing the other party's mother over and over again. There's nothing new. You probably don't know very well that in the Empire, ordinary civilians, especially slaves, don't have much opportunity to receive education. Su Le looked at the sobbing soldier and frowned slightly. After a moment of silence, he continued to translate to his team members. Right now, he is scolding the military intelligence department. They said that those bastards only know how to play tricks and frame their colleague. They threw their strongest reserve team into the encirclement of 3 mecha operators from the Federation just because their team didn't have the royal family's insignia and came from the northern starfield. They never liked the orthodox military. Hearing Su Li's translation, the tension in the team gradually relaxed. They silently looked at the other side and naturally thought of their own experiences. They thought of the pursuit by the base, the infamous Federal Investigation Department of the federal government, and the small-eyed special forces that had left many of their brothers lying in a pool of blood. They felt sorrow in their hearts, and only then did they realize that everyone was in the same situation. The tunnel was silent. The people of the Federation and the Empire had fought side by side for the past 10 days. Even if there was no friendship, there was some trust between them. They also felt the same emotions. Thus, they all closed their eyes tiredly and began to prepare for the final battle tomorrow. Su Lu didn't close his eyes. He checked on Da Vinci's condition and sat down beside the simple makeshift stretcher. He rubbed his slightly tangled eyebrows and silently looked at everyone's faces. He saw the helplessness and pressure in everyone's hearts. Just hearing the name Madman Li almost made the Empire soldiers collapse. It could be imagined how terrifying that person was in their hearts. Including Shan Pao and Xiong Linquan, the Federation soldiers also found it difficult to suppress their nervousness and despair. If the battle was fair, the members of Group 7 would definitely be full of confidence in Su Lu. However, the problem now was that the Federation military wouldn't give them any fair chance to fight. Conspiracy, framing, pursuit, base, and small number of people, the division between justice and betrayal, there was no fairness in this matter. We might die tomorrow, so I have something to say to you. Lying on the stretcher beside Su Lu was Dongfang Yu, the former high-ranking officer of the Iron 7th Division, whose wound had split open again, turned his head with difficulty and said with a hoarse voice, "The purge targeting Group 7 definitely has nothing to do with the division commander. I hope you can believe this." Although the members leaning against the stone wall of the tunnel had their eyes closed, they were thinking about many things. Perhaps it was like how some literary novels described, seizing the last moment to reminisce about the most beautiful scenes of their lives. They weren't really asleep at all. When they heard this, they all opened their eyes and looked at him with puzzled frowns. Dongfang Yu didn't seem to feel the mixed emotions in those gazes. His face was expressionless, and his hoarse voice was abnormally calm. It was very obvious that he was just trying to give some explanation before he left this world. Also, the attack on Group 7 on planet Yellow Doom had nothing to do with the division commander, because I was the one who did it. Several members of Group 7 died because of that incident. Logically speaking, I should have died a long time ago. I also wanted to kill myself, but I didn't expect bad people to live for 1,000 years. I didn't die even after staying in NTR for 3 years, and I was still alive even after taking a radiation bath in the BG Plateau. This time, I've been lying on a stretcher for more than 3 goddamn months, and you all still refuse to King throw me away. Dongfang Yu frowned deeply and said while panting, "Fine, I must accept your kindness, but I still want to tell you that this matter really has nothing to do with the division commander. There was a saying in the Federation, a person who is about to die will not lie." The silent members in the tunnel believed Dongfang Yu's explanation, and they were so tired that they didn't have the strength to be angry about the incident on planet Yellow Doom. Su Lu silently looked at Dongfang Yu's ears that had been cut into 2 by Lao Bai, and suddenly said, "I never believed that Du Shaoqing would do that kind of thing, but I have something I always wanted to ask you. Before you were transferred to planet Yellow Doom, did you ever think that my people would die?" Dongfang Yu tightly pursed his gray lips and didn't say a word. Silence doesn't mean tacit agreement. Perhaps you are helping someone to hide it. Su Lu calmly looked at him and said, "Besides Du Shaoqing, in this world, the only people that you are willing to take the blame for are your dead comrades. I knew very early on that it was Shiman Jin's idea, including the modification of the Bureau of Proclamations data. He was already killed by this young master, and his corpse was hung outside the Parliament Mountain for all to see. He was humiliated, yet you still wanted to help him keep his secret and protect his dignity. Isn't that a bit too stupid?" Dongfang Yu stared at his face. Su Lu said, "I don't care if you ever thought about killing my people, and I don't care if you have redeemed all your sins. Try to survive tomorrow, and we can talk about other things later. I believe that no matter if it's Jie Jiewen, or Mr. Shi, they will all agree to this." As soon as he finished speaking, there was another tremor from deep underground. Gu Shifeng spat out the grass in her mouth, took off her earpiece, and said, "The surveillance has found it. 2 meters underground in the mine area." Chapter 9:16. Level 6. 1. Gu Shifeng stared at the data feedback on the light screen and suddenly frowned. She extended a dirty, round finger and forcefully slashed at the wavy curve that suddenly rose from the bottom of the light screen. She said in shock, "The second sequence of clutter is so neat. What's going on? What does this mean?" Su Lu asked. "It means that the underground is in a state of secondary induction. In other words, someone made a big explosion down there and didn't expect to cause the rock strata to move and cause an earthquake. Gu Shifeng turned her head and looked at him cautiously. She lowered her voice and said, although the location of the epicenter isn't accurately determined, looking at the depth, it should be in the deep mining area mentioned in the east. Su Li's eyes gradually narrowed. After a moment of silence he said, a big explosion deep underground. Could it be that the federal military is trying to cover up some traces? The lone army at the edge of the plateau guessed at the tremors deep underground and wondered if the federal military was trying to cover up some secret. However, the Federation's frontline headquarters in the base didn't notice the two earthquakes at all. All of their attention was focused on them, and they didn't hide their anger and murderous intent at all. In the dimly lit command room, the Federation's commander-in-chief, Lieutenant General Hu Lian, looked at his subordinates with a gloomy face. His voice was cold as he said, I don't care about electromagnetic interference or sudden earthquakes. I only know that the rebel army has less than 10 people, but they managed to survive for more than half a month under the eyes of the Federation's best generals. They crossed 400 kilometers of the Biji Plateau and didn't even lose a hair. He slowly leaned forward and stared at the head of the Air Force's Operations Department. He asked, how are you going to solve this problem? When can the fighter jet group leave? That's a high radiation zone. The battle plan forbids fighter jets from entering. Also, no one would have thought that with just a few people, they would be lucky enough to pick up a military mecca on the plateau. The head of the Air Force's Operations Department wiped the cold sweat off his forehead and explained with a trembling voice, General, electromagnetic interference still exists after the earthquake. This is an objective fact. I can't let my pilots take the risk. Also, during the last battle, the Air and Ground Joint Command System was suddenly invaded by external signals. I think we should find the answer to this problem first. There is no answer. Lieutenant General Hu Lian waved his right arm angrily and said in a deep voice, what you need is action, not thinking. In the end, humans were creatures that relied on thinking to get to where they were today. Even in the army with strict military discipline, even if they were soldiers whose duty was to obey orders, they still couldn't help but think when faced with the highest command of the federal military. This was especially the case for the 7 or 8 generals of the ground forces. They sat in their chairs and didn't say anything. However, the expression on their faces and the expression in their eyes, as well as the long period of silence and disregard, fully expressed their attitude. The atmosphere in the combat command room was very stifling. The Air Force combat troops nodded and began to prepare the air strike plan in the early hours of the morning. The generals of the ground forces slowly looked at each other, and then one of them opened his mouth to question. The commander of the 11th Division, Major General Cheng Mo, who had just returned from the bloody battle in the Southwest War Zone, frowned and looked at the commander on the stage. He said with a hoarse voice, Sir, I still have my reservations about this accusation. In my opinion, the new 17th Division, NTR, is the most outstanding and most resilient group of soldiers in the federal military. They have no reason to betray us. After a short pause, without waiting for General Hu Lian to reply, Major General Cheng Mo said in a deep voice, betrayal always needs a reason. They were carrying out the most dangerous mission. Now, only less than 10 people out of 70 are left. Furthermore, they have already completed the mission. Once they return, they will become heroes of the Federation. What reason do they have to abandon their glory and homeland and rely on those hairy people of the Empire? The generals of the Federal Military Ground Forces had already begun to have doubts about the command center's order to spare no effort in hunting down that small group of rebels. Especially after the previous conflict, they were even more conflicted. They always felt that there was a thick smell of conspiracy, and as an iron-blooded soldier, they were the most resistant to this point. Lieutenant General Hu Lian slowly raised his eyebrows and looked around at the people in the room with a cold expression. He was not Du Shaoqing. He did not have the qualifications or charisma to suppress this group of arrogant and powerful generals who had been on the battlefield of life and death for many years. If he could not take out something powerful at this moment, then he might face a very embarrassing siege. He might even have to pay a price for the previous conflict. Even if he used his superior's authority to suppress these people in the end, he would never be able to regain his dignity. Hu Lian's furrowed eyebrows gradually relaxed. He tapped lightly on the table with an expressionless face and brought up dozens of high-definition ground photos continuously taken by military satellite. A rebellion needs a reason. A group of the Federation's most outstanding soldiers betraying the Federation even more needs a reason. I understand your doubts. Hu Lian looked at the small group of rebels who had escaped in the photos, looked at the two simple stretchers, and looked at a certain person whose face was blurry but whose features could be seen clearly in the crowd. He said, "I think all of you should recognize this person." He turned around and looked coldly at these valiant and proud division commanders. Looking at their shocked expressions and their tightly pursed lips, he could not help but feel happy. He said slowly, "You need a reason. The betrayal of these outstanding soldiers needs a reason. In my opinion, Su Li's appearance is the simplest reason." The generals in the room could not suppress their shock as they stared at the blurry face in the photos. Some of them were the division commanders of the Federation's elite divisions, and some of them were the commanding officers of the ground forces. However, they knew very well the power of this face. Yes, in the eyes of many people, including them, the outstanding soldiers of Old Seven's group had no reason to betray the Federation. However, as long as Su Lu appeared in front of them, they would die for him at any time, let alone betray him. The battle command room was silent. The air mixed with the smell of tobacco and coffee suddenly froze. No one opened their mouths to speak. Hu Lian looked at everyone's reaction and turned his head to stare at He, who was being restrained by two military police in the corner. He said coldly, "Division Commander He, you must be suspended from your duties and be investigated by the Military Law Office. I understand today, so I forgive your rashness. However, if you pull out your gun again, place it on the table, and scream, I will shoot you directly." He's face was ashen. His two arms, which were being held by the military police, trembled violently. He wanted to say something, wanted to do something. However, looking at the instructor's face in the photos, which had not changed at all 3 years ago, he lost all of his strength. First of all, there is good news. Tomorrow there will be one chapter of 3,000 words. The day after tomorrow there will be 2 chapters. The day after that there will be 3 chapters. Then, a little girl, Xiao Mao, has released a new book. It is a love story between a group of evil handsome young men and a rich woman. If you want to understand the lives of other people, go read it quickly. This book is surging up the rankings on the Qidian literature website. After you read it, don't forget to leave some tickets on the literature website. The title of the book, Chronicles of a Young Master in Jingdo. Chapter 9:17. The new 17th Division was on the brink of a mutiny. The new 17th Division was preparing for a mutiny. This ace division with a glorious military history had inherited the undisciplined and ruthless style left behind by their predecessors. They were used to shielding their own, good at external battles, and good at internal strife. When there was a need to abide by military discipline, they were the role models of strict military discipline. On the battlefield of life and death, they often forgot about military discipline out of habit. If they had only focused on discipline, their old teacher Li Pifu would not have been able to lead them to such a shocking achievement. If their hands and feet could be easily bound by the word discipline, Yu Chenghai would not have been able to protect so many members of Group 7 3 years ago. Furthermore, during the 3 years when Du Shaoqing had been commander-in-chief, they had still been as strong and fierce as ever. When the soldiers of the division found out that their comrades had been inexplicably accused of mutiny and then hunted down by the base and that damned Joint Investigation Department, there was no way they could remain calm and wait patiently like little white rabbits for the final result. Their reaction was very direct. Under the cloud of conspiracy hanging over the base, all levels of officers of the 17th Division began to secretly mobilize their forces with the theme of defending against a surprise attack. In the armory at night, the sound of the 100 or so heavy MX mecha self-checks could be faintly heard. If the upper echelons of the federal military could not give a convincing explanation, if that damned Joint Investigation Department did not hand over the culprits who had hunted down Team NTR, if they could not make the more than 10,000 soldiers of the new 17th Division feel good, then what would happen next around the base was something that no one, including Lieutenant General Hu Lian, could imagine. He was escorted back to the headquarters of the new 17th Division by the military police. His face was ashen as he looked at his subordinates around the table. After a moment of silence he said, "This is the front lines. Do you want the 17th Division to be the first unit in history to rebel on the front lines? We are not rebelling." The new 17th Division's mecha commander, Hua Xiaoxi, looked at him with a serious expression and said, "We need to put enough pressure on the base. Otherwise, I cannot imagine how many more days Xiong Linquan and those fellows can hold out." Lin Ai frowned at He Lei and said, "What exactly happened in the command room? Why is Division Commander's expression so ugly?" "I have already been officially suspended from duty." He looked at the group of senior military officers in the room and said, "But I have to warn all of you. Stop all troop movements immediately. Otherwise, no one will be able to bear the consequences once the headquarters determines that there is a mutiny." Hua Xiaoxi silently pulled the trigger and said, "It's not a mutiny attempt. If this matter can't be resolved, so what if there really is a mutiny?" He raised his head and looked at He Lei with a cold gaze. "It's not that I want to criticize you, but you're really too soft. If the instructor was the commander now, would he watch as our soldiers were slaughtered like rabbits? If he was the one who went to the base to negotiate, do you think he would have pulled out a gun and placed it on Hu Lian's table like you did? No, he'll just shoot that old B******. He looked out of the door and his gaze fell on the military police. He lowered his head and looked at his junk box. He laughed at himself and said in a hoarse voice, "Xiong Linquan and the rest are with the instructor now. This is why the headquarters is chasing after them." The room suddenly fell silent. Miss Liu, who had just arrived last night, asked with a livid expression, "Is the news confirmed?" He picked up his junk box and walked out of the door. From today onwards, he was no longer the commander of the 17th Division, but a criminal officer who had been imprisoned. When he reached the threshold, he suddenly stopped and turned back to look at the crowd sternly. "After I leave, none of you are allowed to act rashly. The 4th and 13th Divisions have completed their mobilization last night. It's obvious that they are targeting our division. Also, I have to remind all of you that regardless of whether this is a conspiracy or a purge, if there really is a mutiny, those big shots in the capital ring will righteously get rid of all of us." In the dim room, Director Bailey of the Joint Investigation Department looked at the back of the figure by the window with a smile, secretly pondering the true thoughts in the general's mind. The mobilization of the troops has been completed. No matter what the new 17th Division wants to do, they won't be able to do anything new. Also, I think you must really want them to be a little more impulsive. To deal with the troops left behind by Lord War God without an absolutely correct excuse is indeed a kind of trouble. Lieutenant General Hu Lian turned around and said slowly with an expressionless face, "Lord War God's ever-victorious division is now under the control of a bunch of impulsive idiots. This is a great humiliation to the Federation. I won't deny that I really want to use this opportunity to complete a purge. After a short pause, he looked at Director Bailey and said mockingly, "But do you really think I'm stupid enough to cause a mutiny in the troops? When the time comes, neither you nor I will be able to bear the responsibility." Director Bailey did not respond to the general's mockery. The smile on his face gradually faded as he said in a serious tone, "That spaceship has been trying to escape the surveillance and enter the atmosphere. It's obvious that it wants to help the rebel army leave. Which side does that spaceship belong to? We haven't been able to capture a reliable image, but it definitely can't be an Empire spaceship." Director Bailey shrugged and said, "It's probably that strange spaceship that ran amok in S1 3 years ago. Only that strange spaceship could have such terrifying speed." Lieutenant General Hu Lien walked to the side of the table with a serious expression. Looking at the blinding red arc on the electronic map, he was silent for a moment before saying, "These people were able to break through here. This is beyond my expectations, but they must die. Colonel Li Feng and his Mecha clan are currently retreating from the Straits battle zone. They are closest to the highlands." Director Bailey understood what he meant and raised an objection with a frown. "No one will doubt Colonel Li Feng's ability, but the problem is his personal relationship with Su Lu. Will there be any problems?" Lieutenant General Hu Lien took off his military cap and stroked his white hair. "As far as I know, Colonel Li Feng once made a promise to Commander Shaoqing. He will not let Su Lu go." Director Bailey smiled slightly. He thought that since that promise was only between Du Shaoqing and Li Feng, then you must have received guidance from Chairman Li Jiedu to know about it. Naturally, he would not point this out. His gaze shifted slightly for a moment, and then he suddenly asked, "Regarding the continuous earthquakes on the Biji Plateau, I wonder if the commander has any opinion? According to the Bureau of Proclamation Surveillance, deep underground, it seems, before he could finish, he was cut off by a pair of cold eyes." Lieutenant General Hu Lien stared at him coldly, not bothering to hide the threat and cold-bloodedness in his words. "Investigate what you should, but don't ask about what you shouldn't. Don't forget, this is the front line, a place where stray bullets fly everywhere." Director Bailey's heart clenched. He knew that he had stepped into an area that he definitely should not have, so he immediately shut his mouth. In order not to become the highest-ranking official of the Federation to die from stray bullets, he would not mention anything related to earthquakes until the day he died. Perhaps it was July on Emohua planet. The sky was burning. In the early morning, a heavy object that looked like a meteorite came from the deep universe and crashed into the atmosphere that surrounded the planet. It whistled and tore apart the air that was getting thicker and thicker, leaving behind a dazzling trail of fire. Then, it turned into a white pillar of smoke and fell on the horizon. The surveillance network of the Imperium military had noticed this meteorite. The Federal fleet had already calculated the falling trajectory of this meteorite 7 minutes ago. However, this meteorite fell on the Golan Highland on the side of the Biji Plateau, which was far away from the Federal forces' garrison. The electromagnetic aftershocks after the earthquake seriously hindered the movement of the Air Force. On this barren land, 2 troops saw the meteorite falling from the sky from a viewing range of 40 kilometers. Then, they did not have the time to appreciate this strange astronomical phenomenon. They both silently sped up their speed. The lone troops that left the valley in the middle of the night and headed towards the Golan Highland saw the trail of fire with their own eyes. Although they were exhausted and in extreme pain, they seemed to have swallowed a few large cups of stimulant. Their chest and abdomen burned, and their strength returned to their legs once again. A certain mecha battalion of the Federation that had retreated from the battle zone of the Straits and had continuously marched for 2 days looked at the dust and smoke stirred up by the meteorite falling from the sky. It was as if they could hear the passionate sound of war drums. The heavy mecha engine roared again. Half an hour later, Both parties arrived at the place where the meteorite fell almost at the same time. The charred surface of the meteorite had already peeled off, revealing the metallic structure of the spaceship inside. The cabin door had already opened automatically, ready to welcome a group of escapees. The lone soldier climbed over a gentle slope with great difficulty and stepped through thick bushes. When he saw this scene, he did not feel the slightest bit lucky that he had escaped alive, nor did he feel any ecstasy. This was because they saw 17 pure black Federation MX military mechas, under the leadership of a simple-looking but murderous mecha, had already climbed over the opposite mountain and appeared on the other side of the meteorite spaceship. The 18 Federation MX mechas formed a semicircular encirclement. The center of the encirclement was where the meteorite fell. On the other hand, the lone troops only had 7 or 8 people, more than 10 guns, 2 makeshift stretchers, and 1 broken mecha. The difference in strength between the two sides was too great. It was so great that there was no need to fight at all. At the edge of the bushes, the broken giant mecha shook its exaggerated but useless construction arm. It seemed to be greeting the Federation mechas, but also seemed to be surrendering. Xiong Linquan held the heavy gun in his hand cautiously and looked at the imposing military mechas a few hundred meters away. Then, he silently looked at the back of the only broken mecha on his side. He raised his arm lightly and ordered his team members to carry the stretcher and retreat behind the bushes. In the mecha battle that was about to happen, they would not be of any use. Besides, last night, Sulu had promised them that he would deal with this situation. As Xiong Linquan and the others retreated behind the bushes, the engines on the backs of the 17 black MX mecha suddenly roared to life as they prepared to move. However, right at that moment, that battered assembled mecha smashed down with that thick construction arm. People had names, trees had shadows. Just like how the lone troops and those few Empire people had fallen into despair when they heard Madman Li's name, these Federation mecha were also abnormally nervous at this time. Following the movements of that broken mecha, they subconsciously stopped in their tracks and got into their most perfect and most extreme defensive positions. Although they were facing a broken assembled mecha, they were facing a broken assembled mecha. Chapter 9:18. Contrary to everyone's expectations, or rather the expectations of the alloy mecha, the gigantic, tattered, assembled mecha swung its exaggerated mechanical arm towards the ground, but it did not cause any landslides, nor did it cause any horrifying consequences. In fact, the crater it made on the ground was rather pitiful. That seemingly thick and strong mechanical arm had been broken into countless pieces by the recoil, looking exceptionally pitiful. They had been prepared to receive the strongest blow from the strongest opponent, only to see such a scene instead. They could not help but feel a little strange, a little ridiculous. After all, this was a makeshift mecha made up of countless discarded parts, so its structure was rather pitiful. However, even if it was just a bluff, it still managed to deter the ambush of those Federation MX mecha. After a slight delay, Xiong Linquan and the others quickly retreated back into the bushes. The 17 black MX mecha did not care about those fellows who were retreating from the battlefield. They only stared warily at the tattered mecha in the middle of the field that had already lost an arm and looked like a crippled beggar. They knew very well that with the mobility of those crippled soldiers, there was no way they could escape from the Golan Highlands. The only thing they needed to do was to defeat and destroy this tattered mecha in front of them and erase the powerful name in the cockpit of the mecha. Right then, the tattered, assembled mecha moved once more. The cockpit door slowly opened with an unpleasant creaking sound. The dim light of the morning shone in, revealing Su Li's ordinary but extraordinarily calm face. 200 meters away, the black mecha in the middle of the Federation's mecha group, which had a darker shade of black, popped out the exaggerated alloy blade at the front end of its right mechanical arm. The thick cockpit door opened, revealing Madman Lee's face. His still delicate features held the same hint of madness and violence. After not seeing each other for 3 years, separated by 200 meters on the wasteland, Sulu and Madman Lee looked at each other from afar. They looked at the traces of timidity on each other's faces, and remained silent for a long time. Who knew if it was because they had seen images from a long time ago? Just like Ka Chifeng on the old moon, the knife in his chest and the blood between his teeth in the Linyuan, the sound of gunfire in the mountains and the words in the prison cell, one after the other, he ran wildly towards the blue sea. For a very long period of time, the two of them were publicly acknowledged as the strongest in the Federation. They had fought before, but they had never truly fought to the death. It was only when they met again after 3 years on this bloody battlefield that they finally reached the final moment. The cockpit door opened downwards, like a large door at the tail of a battleship, leading to the endless and deep universe. Sulu looked at the meteorite ship nearby through this cross-section, and at the 10 or so black Federation MX mecha in the distance. His gaze finally and naturally fell upon that mecha, upon Madman Lee's face. "Duel?" Sulu asked. His voice was not very loud, but it clearly penetrated the morning high ground and entered everyone's ears. "No way," Madman Lee replied. His voice was just as proud and cold as before, like a ruthless blade that directly cut through all the messy reminiscences of old times. Hearing these 2 words that seemed to jump out from fiber paper, Su Li's thick eyebrows rose slightly. He looked quietly at him in the distance and said, "You won't even leave us a chance for a fair duel? I'm carrying out military duty, not a street brawl." Li Feng replied in a low voice, "You were also once a soldier of the Federation. You should understand very well that talking about fairness on the battlefield and calling it a duel is very childish thinking." Sulu frowned slightly. After a moment of silence, he said, "The problem is that even you don't believe that you're carrying out military duty. If you say that you want to kill me because I'm a citizen of the Empire, then there's no reason for Big Bear and the others to be killed by you." "A soldier's duty is to obey orders," said Li Feng. Sulu said mockingly, "What's the point of saying this? 3 years later, many people will laugh at me for becoming a third-rate philosopher. 3 years later, I don't want to laugh at you for becoming an ice demon like Du Shaoqing. When have you ever taken the military orders of your superiors seriously? I must bring everyone back." Li Feng's brows creased slightly. "If they are wronged, I guarantee that they will receive a fair trial." Sulu looked at him like he was looking at a naive child. He smiled and said, "The Federation still has such a thing as fairness?" Li Feng loathed the way he looked at him. He laughed coldly and said, "Do you think that only the Empire can find fairness? No, there's no fairness in the Empire either. The Empire is a pile of dog shit." Sulu calmly looked at that familiar face in the distance. After a short pause, he continued, "But you can't be willing to throw a pile of dog shit called the Federation in your face just because of this." Li Feng looked at that tattered mecha assembled together, and was silent for a long time. "As the grandson of the war god, you should understand the way our 17th Division does things, and you should also understand the way Team 7 does things. When we are insulted and harmed, we will not believe that any outsider can help us solve the problem. We only believe in ourselves," Sulu said, "so don't count on them surrendering today." Li Feng's furrowed brows slowly relaxed. After a moment of silence, he looked at that face in the morning light and said, "Sulu, I will give you a fair fight. If you lose, your people must give up resistance. I don't want this operation to become a one-sided massacre." Sulu looked at him quietly, his left hand slowly and steadily sliding over the control stick. At this time, he did not have the simulation system. He was sitting on a tattered hybrid mecha that could collapse at any moment. The so-called fair fight with dignity was actually just bullshit. However, no one knew that under his calm expression there was a smiling flower. Just as he had said to Xiong Linquan last night, he understood madmanly, so he could deal with madmanly. The situation was progressing according to his plan. And if I win, he shouted in that direction. The most powerful MXD mecha against a tattered, assembled mecha, the difference in strength was too great. More importantly, the person operating the MXD mecha was madmanly. Under these circumstances, even if war god Li Pifu was reborn, Feng Yu crossed the stars to come here, or Huai Chaosher suddenly doubled in strength, they still would not be able to defeat the opponent. Thus, no one thought that Su Lu would win. Even Li Feng, who considered himself vigilant enough, did not think so himself. But strangely, due to some hidden worry in the depths of his heart, Madmanly replied seriously after a moment of silence, "If you win, I promise that those people behind the bushes will not be harmed in any way, but you must die." "Very good, this is the promise I need," said Su Lu with a smile, "only, I really don't understand. Why do you want me to die regardless of the outcome? Whether as your uncle or uncle, you have no reason to hate me so much." There were only 3 MXD mecha in the entire Federation, and only 2 people in the entire Federation had the ability to operate a MXD mecha using turbo technology. Those 2 people were Su Lu and Madmanly. Su Li's little white flower was currently hiding in an unknown armory of the Federation, covered in dust. Meanwhile, the other MXD mecha with an even darker black had shone brilliantly on the Mo Hua planet for 3 years, fighting several battles with Huai Caosher's peach miasma, exceptionally valiant. Today, in the morning light of the Golan Highlands, the black MXD mecha was like a god of war. The alloy blade at the front of its right mechanical arm slowly lowered, pointing at its chest with an inexplicable fighting spirit. Then, Li Feng's low and murderous voice came out. "You named Little White Flower Lucio. You're such a sissy. I'm different. My mecha is called Beheading Joy. You should know the meaning of this name very well." Su Lu heard the indomitable interest in his voice, and his eyes slowly narrowed. The voice from the black MXD mecha continued, "That year in the wilderness, I saved you from Du Shaoqing's gunpoint. At that time, you told me that you weren't from the Empire, and in the end, you were from the Empire. In Allure prison, I watched over you for a few nights. I asked you if you were from the Empire, and you said no. In the end, you were from the Empire. After that, for 3 whole years, I stayed by Du Shaoqing's side. It was because I owed him a life of yours. I want to repay this life, but as long as I don't kill you, this life of mine will never be completely repaid. 3 years ago, I was the one who saved your life, so I have the responsibility and obligation to let you die." Li Feng looked at the broken mecha at the edge of the bushes in the distance expressionlessly. Looking at the familiar yet strange face in the morning light, the vision at the edge of his eyelashes suddenly blurred. It was as if he saw the day of the riot in Allure prison, when Huai Chaosher jumped out of the snow and chased after this small-eyed man for hundreds of miles. In the end, he chased him to the deep and blue sea. His mood gradually turned cold and violent, and he shouted in a low voice, "I saw you jump into the sea. You should have died then. Why didn't you die? Do you think that I'll watch you, the Empire's crown prince, slip away from my eyes again? I'll stop you from thinking about it. Go to hell." As the 3 words roared out like 3 bombs, they smashed into the peaceful wasteland of the Golan Highlands. The black mecha's cockpit door closed with a whoosh. Accompanied by the violent roar of the twin engines and the unique beeping sound of the turbocharger, the black MXD controlled by Li Feng suddenly turned into a black cannonball. It roared out, shattering the surrounding air, and blasted towards the broken mecha 200 meters away. There were no beautiful evasive maneuvers, nor were there any seductive stances. The killing intent that the black MXD had accumulated over the past 3 years was unleashed with this simple yet direct straight line. Its terrifying power was concentrated into a single point. The The broken mecha also moved, sprinting down the gentle slope. However, the temporarily repaired mecha couldn't enter combat mode at all. The engineering mecha's wide tracks carried an extremely heavy body, crushing the wasteland. It looked as pitiful as the picture of an old cow pulling a broken cart in a prehistoric picture book. The straight black line slammed into the huge body of the broken mecha, accompanied by the terrifying sound of metal tearing and heavy components colliding. In an instant, the outcome was clear. Under the violent slash of the black MXD's more than 10 sharp blades, the broken mecha fell apart, turning into a desolate rain of metal pieces that fell to the ground with a clatter. No miracle happened. Maybe a miracle was going to happen. Chapter 9:19. Miracles were never bestowed by the Creator. Instead, they came from the never-withering determination and the best preparation in advance. Temporary failure was not scary. The real key was whether you were prepared for failure and tried to take advantage of it. The broken mech was instantly blasted into smithereens, turning into a black rain that filled the sky. This was not unexpected, including Su Lu in the cockpit. However, the spectators did not notice that there were actually many unnoticeable details hidden in this tragic one-sided battle. They did not notice his preparations. For example, the wide tracks had come off faster than expected. For example, the splashing of the thick armor had been more spectacular than the MXD blade. For example, when the assembled mecha had been cut in half at the waist, the faintly discernible rocket launchers had caused the upper half of the assembled mecha to topple over faster than expected. Because of the difference in speed, the scene suddenly became strange. The black MXD was like a violent woodcutter chopping down a heavy stone tree. The broken upper half of the tree seemed to have a pair of invisible legs. With a few muffled sounds, it broke away from the heavy alloy fragments that filled the sky and smashed towards the front right with a whoosh. On the right front, there were 2 Federation Mecha MX military mecha silently observing the battle. They watched as that half-section of the engineering mecha, weighing several dozen tons, came crashing down like a giant rock from outer space. However, they were unable to react in time, only able to watch and wait for the collision to happen. No one could react to this extremely strange move of Su Li's, except for Li Feng. The seemingly ruthless Mad Chop was, in fact, in an extremely cautious and calm state. He knew how difficult and powerful an enemy Su Lu was. He knew that this person would definitely not be so stupid as to wait for death. Instead, he would have many strange tricks up his sleeve. For example, at this moment, with the help of the rocket launcher, the assembled mech had turned its heavy upper half into a primitive catapult. It intended to escape from the black MXD's range of control and take the risk to subdue the enemy. Since he was prepared, he naturally did not panic. When that half of the engineering mech swept horizontally towards the right like a supernatural scene, the black beheading happiness mech under Li Feng's control seemed to have a few more highly sensitive monitoring systems behind it. With a swoosh, it turned around and the Dairon's autocannon at the front of the mechanical arm opened fire. The high-density rain of bullets was tightly sealed within an area of 30 square centimeters, turning into an extremely lethal straight line that chased after half of the engineering mecha in the air. Bursting, 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 countless white flowers blossomed. The heavy half of the engineering mech was hit by more than 100 large-caliber bullets. It could not jump more than 200 meters. As if it was struck by lightning, it fell heavily on the wasteland of the Golan Highlands with a dull thud. Dust and gravel splattered everywhere on the hard ground. The clumsy half of the mech rolled around in vain. The charred body of the mech was a mess. Electric sparks shone sorrowfully between the raised panels. The battle was not over yet. This was just the beginning. Just as that half of the engineering mech fell to the ground, a clear splashing sound once again came from the cockpit door. 12 miniature self-ejecting rocket pillars exploded at the same time, and the heavy cockpit door was pushed far away with a bang. Su Lu stepped on the edge of the cockpit and exerted force in his legs. Using the terrifying initial speed of the ejection, he swept out like lightning, avoiding the dense rain of bullets behind him. Like a thunderstorm, he charged more than 100 meters. Then, he turned around and gently landed on the target mech like a falling leaf. The Daren's autocannon at the front of the mechanical arm of the Black Beheading Happiness mech suddenly stopped firing. This was because Su Lu, who was sticking to the mech like a falling leaf, was constantly climbing and jumping. It was very difficult to lock onto him. What was more troublesome was that if Li Feng tried to use the dense rain of bullets to kill him, then it was very likely that the mech he was in would also be destroyed at the same time. Bang! The Federation pilot in the cockpit of the Black MX mech immediately reacted. He understood the real reason why Colonel Li Feng had stopped attacking. His eyes widened as he operated the heavy mechanical arm to smash down on the cockpit door of the mech. Even though this action was very likely to lead to his death, he did not hesitate at all. The large and hard mechanical arm smashed heavily on the cockpit door. The alloy door was clearly deformed, and an ear-piercing screech of metal could be heard. Su Lu stepped on the crevice of the Area 41 armor and narrowly avoided the attack. His body rolled like a falling leaf as he climbed straight up the shoulder of the tall mech. The construction mechanical repair arm on his arm began to move quickly, buzzing and vibrating. The duckbeak-shaped repair arm probed out and removed the hidden plate behind the MX mech's shoulder. A high-speed rotating drill bit quickly disassembled the 6 positioning screws. The densely packed data cables were exposed before Su Li's eyes. His face was expressionless as he gripped them with his hand. Then, he used some force to slide them down. The plastic sheet cracked, and the data cables were truly exposed, including the core lines inside. His steady palm continued to hold the exposed core lines. The scorching power behind his waist surged out, passing through his wrist and instantly turning into a trickling stream under his subtle control. As those trickling streams passed through the core lines, they entered the MX mech's control hub. With a pleasant click, the cockpit door of the mech opened. Like a falling leaf, Su Lu gently stuck to the Black MX mech, removing the guard, removing the screws, melting the cable, and then successfully opening the cockpit door. In total, Su Lu had completed 17 effective operations, all of which took less than 5 seconds. What was even more inconceivable was that while he was performing these operations, the black mech on his body had been trying to attack him without regard for mutual destruction. The heavy mech jumped and rolled madly on the wasteland like a lion trying to shake off the annoying mouse on its body. Su Lu was like a ship rolling endlessly at sea. Not only did he have to keep his footing, he also had to solve problems as quickly as possible. As the designer of the MX mecha, he knew all the minute details of this mecha and even every hidden design. And this was still not enough. He still needed to be the best mechanic in the world, a fisherman with the strongest strength, a cracker with the calmest and thickest nerves, and most importantly, he still needed to have the ability to control the mecha using the human body. Only then would he be able to complete this impossible task. In all of history, only Feng Yu had ever performed such a shocking feat in the green hills of the Hushi region's outskirts in the Donglin region. Today, Su Lu had finally done it. The cockpit door opened, and Su Lu floated in like a leaf. The face of the Federation soldier in the dark-colored pilot's uniform was full of shock. He did not understand why the central control system would suddenly lose control, why the cockpit door would open at this moment, exposing himself to the enemy in the morning light and cold wind. Su Lu grabbed his wrist like lightning and threw the pistol far away. Then, he used 3 fingers to press against the artery below the soldier's earlobe. Turning his head, he saw only darkness outside the cockpit door. As they watched him charge into the cockpit, more than 10 Federation MX mecha crazily surrounded him. The high-speed rotating Darlin's autocannons were aimed in the direction of the cockpit door, forming a scene like that of a sleeping forest. However, no one opened fire. In many of the Federation military's rumors, the former Colonel Su Lu was already a character that was gradually becoming a legend. Today, after witnessing his legendary actions with their own eyes, these Federation soldiers were not only angry, but also in awe of him, not daring to act rashly. The group of black mecha parted to form a path, and the heavy Jiangxi MXD mecha slowly walked over. It walked directly to the front of the captured mecha, only stopping when it was less than 10 meters away. Accompanied by the faint sound of air splashing and the clicking of the self-balancing system, the cockpit door opened once again, revealing Li Feng's emotionless face. The two met again, and the distance between them was extremely close. The situation was also very different from before. Su Lu now had an undamaged mecha and a hostage. Li Feng's left hand slowly moved away from the control stick, taking off half of the simulation system on his body. He stared coldly at the nearby Su Lu and said in an unprecedentedly serious tone, "You can't be so shameless. You're just forcing me to flip out." Su Lu slowly placed his hand on the control stick, and the black MX Mecha's Darlin's autocannons turned to aim at the cockpit door. The area covered by the rain of bullets included him and the Federation officer he was holding hostage. His expression was unusually calm as he replied, "In order to survive, I can do even more shameless things. As for flipping out, you should remember very clearly. Even if it was Du Shaoqing, I wouldn't give him any chance to flip out." Hearing his reply, Li Feng suddenly laughed. His delicate eyebrows trembled, his eyes abnormally bright, but an incomparably violent aura began to emanate from him. The smile did not fade, but it was exceptionally cold. Li Feng said coldly, "He's a soldier. I gave you a chance to fight fairly, so you shouldn't have ambushed him. Do you think I'll let you go just because you have a hostage?" As his voice fell, he pushed the control stick, and the left mechanical arm of the beheading Joy Mecha abruptly shot out from behind. It accurately pierced through the gaps between the mecha and aimed at the meteorite-like flying ship dozens of meters away, and fired fiercely. Bursts of explosions rang out. Li Feng, under the threat, did not make any concessions. He did not even say a single word to Su Lu. He simply and violently destroyed that flying ship, cutting off all of the others' escape route. Just now, Li Feng was a colonel in the Federation who was in charge of military affairs. Now, Li Feng had officially become Madman Li. The Madman Li who was known for his ruthlessness, coldness, and strength. The terrifying Madman Li. Everyone in the Federation was afraid of Madman Li in this state, including the current deputy chairman of Xian and all the other powerful figures. This was because once Madman Li went crazy, he would not listen to reason. Other than the words of war god Li Pifu and Zhong Shouhu, he would not listen to anyone. War god Li Pifu and that fierce tiger in the West Woods had become the eternal stars in the universe. Su Lu seemed to be in a truly dangerous situation, but he was still calm and unafraid. This was because he had never been afraid of his opponent. Whether it was Lin Yuan, Kaki, or Qin Qing, they had defeated the invincible Madman Li in the military, but they had never defeated him. Looking at the flying ship in the distance that had been blasted into pieces, Su Li's eyes slowly narrowed. His left hand gripped the pilot's throat, and he took a step forward. Facing the dozens of high-speed rotating Darlin's cannons, he walked to the edge of the cockpit door. He raised his left arm expressionlessly and suspended the pilot's body in midair. Then, he stared into Madman Li's eyes and began to vent his anger. Chapter 920. Do you think that I will be afraid of you because you are unreasonable and violent? Madman Li, you probably forgot what kind of person I am. When there is a need, I will be even more unreasonable and violent than you, because at this moment I am more righteous than you. You gave me a chance to fight fairly? Su Lu narrowed his eyes and looked at the Federation mecha around him. Give me your MXD, and I will fight all of you alone. Is that fair? Don't forget that I designed these mechas. Is the Federation treating me so fairly? He looked around and his nail-like gaze finally landed on Madman Li's cold face. He licked his dry lips and frowned. If you say that I don't have the right to be fair because I am from the Empire, then what about Team 7? When I went to the front lines, there were 137 people. Do you know how many people are left after 3 years, including this planet and the retired old men? Su Li's voice became light and tired. It was even more boring than the morning breeze in a foreign land. His neurotic lips moved slightly and he said softly, 31 left. The rest are all dead. Just like those guys behind the bushes, they died mysteriously. The Golan Highlands fell into a short silence. The bushes around the mecha group trembled slightly. No one knew what had happened. Su Lu stared at Madman Li's face and suddenly raised his voice. No longer suppressing the anger that had been suppressed for days, he shouted harshly, "Did the Federation's worst troops have such a high death rate? Did Du Shaoqing send the 4 divisions to the Southwest War Zone? Did the Straits War Zone have any troops? If not, then tell me, what kind of King fairness is this?" Madman Li raised his eyebrows slightly and said slowly, "The people who died in Team 7 are paying the price for you. But they have no reason to." Su Lu looked at him and replied mockingly, "Whether I am from the Empire or not has nothing to do with them, just like how your father is a bastard. But I don't think you are a bastard, and I don't think you need to pay the price." Rebels? Do you really believe the words of the general in the base? Do you believe the accusations of the higher-ups in the military? No, I know you don't believe me. Group 7 was brought up by me and Lao Bai. You know how amazing they are. Xiong Linquan and the others were temporarily transferred to NTR before the war and were sent to the Southwest War Zone. They were purposely forgotten and tried to freeze to death in the enemy-occupied area. Then, they valiantly survived and beautifully completed those damned missions. What was the result? In the end, they were hunted down by the federal military as rebels when they were already in a desperate situation. You just said that I am shameless, then I would like to ask, what is this? What was going on with the Federation? How did it become such a garbage dump? Madman Li, I was once a member of this army, but I never thought that in just 3 short years, this army would become a pile of dog *T. You didn't investigate these conspiracies, didn't investigate what happened under the plateau, and instead came here to hunt down your own comrade. What kind of dog *T have you become? Su Lu stared at Madman Li's face and scolded him with the harsh and bitter tone that had disappeared for many years. He said mockingly, "After you and your father died, how could you have the face to see the old man? Enough." Madman Li listened patiently, his eyebrows twitching from time to time. Finally, he could not help but interrupt his scolding and said slowly and coldly, "I have my eyes. I will go and see what happened. I will investigate what needs to be investigated. It is not up to you, the Crown Prince of the Empire, to lecture me, but you must die." "You have your eyes?" Su Lu slowly released his left hand so that the pale pilot could breathe some fresh air. He looked at Madman Li and said, "But the problem is that in this world, most of the people in the Federation are blind." Speaking of this, he seemed to have thought of something. He took a deep breath, paused for a moment and continued calmly, "Actually, I have never thought about whether or not to return to the Federation, and when to return to the Federation, because there is a most troublesome problem that I have never been able to solve. But now I understand that these are just excuses. Those are excuses to convince yourself to escape, because no matter how troublesome the problem is, no matter how difficult it is to solve, you have to go and solve it. You have to take the first step. If you just hide in a corner and ponder in vain, that is the most boring fantasy. I will return to the Federation, and soon. It was a very calm voice, a very indifferent narration. However, when he heard Su Lu say that he would return to the Federation soon, Madman Li's eyebrows seemed to have been stimulated. He suddenly raised them and felt the murderous intent hidden in those calm words. It was extremely cold. He always remembered that 3 years ago, in that famous farewell letter, Su Lu had said, "Whether it is the government or the 7 great families, I want to see what you will turn the Federation into and what you will turn yourself into. Do not try to hurt the people I want to protect, or else one day I will turn into a burning meteorite and fall from the sky, smashing all of your palaces and power into pieces." Was the people he wanted to protect the people in the silent march, the members of Group 7 who had silently died on the front lines, or was it just those things he wanted to protect? Once Madman Li's eyebrows were raised, they could not be lowered again. He quietly looked at the small-eyed man standing on the cockpit door. He could vaguely see that stone from Dong Lin falling from the sky, dragging a long fiery tail as it smashed fiercely into the capital special district, into Parliament Mountain, into the official residence, and into the heads of those important figures who were unwilling to see flowing fire. Madman Li slowly forced out a few cold and suppressed words from between his teeth. The Federation's matters will be handled by the people of the Federation. What is a person of the Empire like you going to the Federation for? You can say that I am cheap, but I still think of myself as a person of the Federation. Dozens of my closest brothers died on this bastard planet. In the past, I always pretended that I didn't know, but now I can no longer continue pretending, so I can only go back. Su Lu looked at him calmly. Suddenly, the corners of his lips curled up, revealing a mouth full of neat white teeth. He said, "Go back for what? The first thing, of course, is to kill your biological father." Suddenly, he took a step back into the dim cockpit. His left hand was still cautiously and vigilantly holding the pilot's body, blocking in front of his body. His heel slowly stepped on a button somewhere. Now let's make things simpler. This is a personal grudge, and it doesn't involve anything else. Regarding these matters, you have your own eyes, so I will be my eyes. Su Lu raised his right hand, pointed 2 fingers at his eyes, and said, "Distinguish between black and white." Madman Li slowly tilted his neck and looked at him from the side of the frame. Half of his body was immersed in the darkness of the cockpit. After a moment of silence, he suddenly said, "Can the eyes of the dead also distinguish between black and white? After I die, I will also dig out my eyeballs and soak them in formaldehyde water to see how Pabre and your father will die." Su Lu stepped on the protruding button beside his foot and said, "And I won't die so easily." As Su Li's foot stepped on that button, the situation suddenly changed. The black MX mech began to tremble violently. Amidst the continuous popping sounds, more than a dozen precision rocket thrusters were fully activated. The powerful reaction force caused the entire cockpit to instantly separate from the body. Like a perfectly round metal shell, it whistled and shot diagonally into the sky above the wasteland. Almost at the same time, a loud roar came from the bushes hundreds of meters away that had been silent for too long. A dark-colored spaceship covered in optically adsorbent material flew diagonally under the propulsion of a powerful engine. The 10 or so Federation MX mechas were completely unable to react at all. They could only watch as the cockpit that had been ejected and the spaceship that had been hidden behind the bushes at some point in time completed an incredibly precise mid-air capture maneuver in mid-air. Then, it turned into a conspicuous line that tore through the blue morning sky, whistling away from the Golan Heights at high speed and flying out of the atmosphere. Perhaps it was July, but there was more than one meteor in the sky. Through precise calculations and the combination of materials, Philip had sent 2 air-to-ground transfer spaceships to the Golan Heights at once. The spaceship that was dragging Huawei was only a target used to attract the Federation's attention. The spaceship that was actually used to pick up people silently landed behind the bushes. When Su Lu was facing off against Madmanly and the 17 Federation mecha in the wasteland, Xiong Linquan and the others had already carried the stretcher and quietly boarded the spaceship. In order to prevent Lunatic Li from noticing the commotion on the other side, Su Lu had to stay on the field and perform a total of 3 precise and perfect ejection moves. His unbelievable mecha control allowed him to complete this move, and in the end, he was able to climb high and retreat gracefully. Su Lu and the old man were invincible. Madman Li silently looked at the spaceship that was disappearing into the horizon. He didn't speak for a long time. Finally, the corner of his mouth twitched slightly. He muttered to himself in a low voice, 3 ejections. You're still so strong, but who can distinguish between black and white? The surrounding cockpits opened one by one. The pilot that was held hostage by Su Lu was also rescued. In the last moment before the cockpit was ejected, this pilot was thrown out. After a short period of unconsciousness, he woke up. His life wasn't in any danger. The morning breeze brushed past. More than 10 black mecha were looking at the eastern sky. These were the most outstanding soldiers of the Federation. Their faces were filled with resentment and anger. They cursed Su Li's shamelessness and cunning angrily, and then they looked at the beheading happiness mecha with complicated expressions. As members of the core mecha camp directly under Madmanly, they knew very well what kind of strength their colonel possessed. Thus, at this moment they were somewhat puzzled and confused. Why didn't their colonel do anything when the cockpit was ejected at the last moment? Yes, during the process of the last cockpit being ejected, with Madman Li's strong mecha control skills, he definitely had the time and opportunity to stop or knock down the cockpit. However, for some unknown reason, in the end, he didn't do anything. Perhaps it was because of Su Li's last sentence. He said he wanted to go back to the Federation to kill my father. Madman Li lit a cigarette and said expressionlessly, I feel that this matter can be done. I'm too embarrassed to do it myself, so someone has to do it. Chapter 921. There was a saying in the Federation that the thinner the lips, the colder and more ruthless the temperament of a person. This saying was hard to prove with Su Li's attitude on the surface, but when probed into the depths of his heart, it vaguely made sense. On the other hand, Madman Li was the opposite. He was the youngest colonel in the Federation with thin lip. If he hadn't been willing to silently protect Du Shaoqing for 3 years, he might have already become the youngest general in the history of the Federation. In the eyes of many people, he had a ruthless and cold temperament. As he watched the spaceship leave, he could coldly discuss how his own father was about to be hunted down by someone like Su Lu. In reality, however, not many people could touch the true fire in his ruthless body. The military vehicle driving towards the base shook uneasily. The cigarette swayed uneasily between his thin lips. From time to time, he would flick out a few wisps of smoke, smearing the glass for a moment before disappearing without a trace. Just like the thoughts that were rapidly flashing through his mind at this moment. Before Du Shaoqing was transferred back to the capital ring, he had a long conversation with him in the battlefield graveyard. During the conversation, the Federation General's greatest concern wasn't the war situation on planet Mohua after he left, but the internal problems of the Federation forces. The political atmosphere of the Federation, especially the capital special district's political atmosphere, had long been corrupted. The infamous Joint Investigation Department had long wanted to extend their tentacles into the front lines outside the Space Channel, but they didn't dare make a move due to Du Shaoqing's power and influence. Du Shaoqing was worried that after he left, no one would suppress the Joint Investigation Department, which had extremely high authority. He was worried that those filthy political conflicts would invade the forces, so he secretly instructed Li Feng to closely observe, pay attention, or guard against such anomalies. This seemingly difficult task was very simple for Li Feng because he was the grandson of the Lees of Philadelphia, the son of Chairman Li Jiedu, and everyone knew that the man behind the dark curtain was none other than Li Jiedu. As per Du Shaoqing's instructions, Li Feng had been keeping a vigilant eye on the 17th Division. Even after being sent to the Straits to take charge of the battle, he had not forgotten about this matter. When he confirmed that the new 17th Division would not be going to the front lines, and that the upper echelons of the military and the investigation department probably did not do anything, he relaxed. Then, at the end of the continuous battle, he was somewhat shocked and angry to receive news that the NTR team of the new 17th Division had defected. This was an accident. If Da Vinci had obediently accepted the investigation and not chosen to fire back, then none of the subsequent events would have happened. In a dark room in the headquarters deep in the base, General Hu Lian, the commander-in-chief of the federal military, looked at the young officer in front of him. After a moment of silence, he continued to explain, "You should be very clear about the whole process of the matter. According to the on-site investigation and testimony, the shooting incident could have been an accident, or it could have been a cold-blooded murder by Leonardo da Vinci and others." General Hu Lian was the highest-ranking officer on the front lines. He had the highest authority and authority. Logically speaking, there was no need for him to explain these things to a colonel. However, because of the other party's special identity and the ruthless aura hidden under his calm expression, he had to explain. Li Feng's thin lips slightly opened. There was no emotion in his voice. An accident and murder are two completely different concepts. But in the end, people died. General Hu Lian looked into his eyes and rubbed his forehead. He said in a low voice, "Small Eyes combat team and reconnaissance team died. There were also people in the NTR second camp of the 17th Division, and then Leonardo da Vinci fled. Deserters and defectors are still two completely different concepts." The young officer's voice was still calm. No matter how hard the general tried to discern his true intentions, he was unable to do so. General Hu Lian's expression gradually became serious. He frowned and stared at his face. After a long silence, he said, "Everyone in the army knows the temper of the bandits in Old Seven's group. Do you remember how Magnolia cut off Dongfang's ear 3 years ago? If Xiong Linquan and the others knew about this shooting incident, how would they react? They would definitely act recklessly. I am the commander. I have to consider the entire situation on the front lines. I can't put my mind on such a small matter. I have to consider the stability of the entire army. In order to eliminate all unstable factors, in order to prevent Xiong Linquan and the others from acting recklessly, the base decided to act recklessly and pin the crime of defection on them." Li Feng slowly frowned and looked at the general behind the table. General Hu Lian was silent for a long time before he replied. "They acted together with the Crown Prince and the soldiers of the Empire. They even launched 3 attacks on the federal forces. The headquarters has sufficient evidence to prove that they have betrayed the Federation." Li Feng tightly pursed his thin lips and looked at him in silence for a long time. General Hu Lian looked at him and said sincerely, "There will be no record of our conversation today. I didn't admit to anything just now, but I must remind you that the capital ring is very chaotic right now. Mr. President and Chairman Li are under too much pressure. The front lines cannot be messed up. Little Feng, no matter what conflicts you have with Chairman Li, you are still the descendant of the Lees of Philadelphia. You should consciously protect the legitimacy of the federal forces. In my opinion, those bandits have no right to stay in the federal forces, much less the glorious 17th Division." Li Feng slowly stood up and seriously fastened the collar around his neck. He looked at the military boss behind the table and said in a deep voice, "I am indeed a member of the Lees of Philadelphia, but General, you forgot one thing. As a soldier of the Federation, my grandfather would never treat any federal forces, including the 17th Division, as his private army. If that father of mine has expressed similar intentions to you, I can only say that to this day, he probably still doesn't understand why my grandfather retired to the lakeside. I can only say that he has no right to wear this military uniform. Li Feng stood up straight in his dark military uniform. With a clap, he saluted expressionlessly like a sword about to be unsheathed. General Hu Lian looked at him and squeezed out a strained smile, saying, "You fought well in the Battle of the Straits. You should rest early. I will ask for a reward for you. The next time we meet, you should have an extra star on your shoulder." I have never needed to rely on a general's star to prove my accomplishment. My mecha's mechanical legs are already painted with countless stars. Li Feng slowly put down his right hand and said in a deep voice, "Since you insist on the legitimacy of the federal forces and insist that the 17th Division is an army of the Lees of Philadelphia and cannot tolerate any scum, then no matter the reward, please hand over the new 17th Division to me. He has already been suspended." "I will sign the order immediately," said Hu Lian. Li Feng walked towards the door of the office, but he suddenly stopped at the doorstep and said, "Since from now on, the new 17th Division is my unit, then I hope that Sir General will be able to transfer the 3 mechanics around our encampment away as soon as possible. With my unit being blocked in an alley, I will not be in a good mood. I will not be in a good mood. I will not let others be in a good mood." The armored military vehicle roared as it drove out of the forward operating base, rushing toward the area where the new 17th Division was stationed. Li Feng lit up another cigarette, causing the cigarette and his tall and strong body to sway uneasily at the same time. His slightly furrowed brows contained a storm. He sat in the front passenger seat, with a few officers in the back. These officers were the assistants or supervisors that War Godly Pifu had specially chosen for him after he had caused a ruckus on Parliament Hill and smashed Senator Zion's office. Many years had passed in a flash. These officers had followed him through the West Woods and entered the Empire. Their loyalty and ability were unquestionable. Feeling the strangely oppressive atmosphere in the car, no one spoke. One of the staff officers had been staring at the screen on the workbench on his knees, and no one knew what he saw. He waved his arm vigorously, and then quickly reported to the front, "The letter of appointment has been filed. You are officially the acting commander of the new 17th Division." "What about the 3 mechanics around the 17th Division?" asked Li Feng expressionlessly. "The defense order has been issued. According to the time calculation, they would have already evacuated when we arrived," replied the staff officer. Li Feng shook his head and threw the cigarette in his hand out of the window. He said, "Other than being good at defense, Hu Lian's most famous skill is to flatter my father. For him to hand over the 17th Division to me so quickly means that the rumors are true. But I wonder if in a few more hours, he will regret handing over the authority too quickly." In the shaking military vehicle, the staff officers looked at each other. Although they did not speak, they could see the excitement in each other's eyes. They knew very well that the calmer the young acting commander in the front passenger seat was, the crazier he would be. "Get me a copy of all the orders and records of the NTR unit immediately. Look for old Luo in the headquarters for this matter. Top secret document. His authority level is not enough. Just say that I want it. If anything happens, I will take responsibility for him, even if it is the Bureau of Proclamation." "Yes." Also, Li Feng frowned slightly. Thinking of Su Li's words before he left, he said, "Investigate what exactly happened with the earthquake at the BG Plateau." A battered military vehicle drove into the military camp in the desolate twilight. Smoke and dust could be faintly seen in the distance. It was probably the movement of the 3 fully equipped mechanics. The scene of hundreds of mechas activating at the same time, although it was not in front of one's eyes, one could imagine how magnificent it would be. His military boots stomped heavily on the ground. Madman Li walked out of the military vehicle. There was no emotion on his face, only a violent rage that was almost impossible to suppress. On the way, he had already obtained all the secret records and completely understood the so-called rebel army's command and pursuit, so he no longer hid his true emotions. He did not care to hide them. Get out! Get out! Get out! The young acting commander's burly body burst into the military camp. The military police, who were ordered to monitor the 17th Division, were directly blown away by a series of thunderous roars. Walking into the new 17th Division headquarters, the first thing Madman Li did was to stop Helay's confinement. Then, he gathered all the officers of the new 17th Division above the rank of colonel for an impromptu meeting. My name is Li Feng. From today onwards, I will be the acting commander of the new 17th Division. Chapter 922. This was Madman Li's opening speech as the new commander of the 17th Division. For an outsider to declare his ownership of an ace division of the Federation, he seemed so righteous and rude. Hua Xiaoxi, Amy, and the other officers of the 17th Division looked at each other silently, but even with their arrogance, they did not raise any objections. Just as Hu Lian had said, in the eyes of everyone in the Federation military, the 17th Division was born with the surname Li. History and tradition began with the military god Li Pifu. After the reorganization, the new commander, Yu Chenghai, was Li Pifu's chef. In the past, the candidate for commander had been Su Lu, who was personally chosen by Li Pifu. Until today, the grandson of the Lis of Philadelphia had finally made his debut. It's not so easy to be the commander of the 17th Division. Madman Li looked at Helay expressionlessly and said in a low voice, "My grandfather can do it, so can old Commander Yu. If Su Lu is not from the Empire, so can I. But you can't. Do you know why? Because you can't be like my grandfather, flying a broken mecha for 1,000 miles and killing the Emperor of the Empire. You can't be like Commander Yu, flying into a rage at the general my father sent to interrogate you all, like an old rabbit protecting its cub, ready to bite at any moment, daring to call Du Shaoqing a pretty boy to his face. You can't be like Su Lu, foolishly flying a 3-winged battleship through the space channel to chase after an Empire fleet. To become a true member of the 17th Division." Madman Li looked around at the officers in the room, and his gaze finally landed on Helay's face. He said sternly, "To be the commander of the 17th Division, you have to be more ruthless than anyone else." Helay's expression was very complicated. As the former acting commander, he had just come out of confinement when he was mercilessly scolded by the current acting commander. Moreover, the other's rank was the same as his, but he was much younger than him. Who could accept this? But at this time, the person lecturing with a sullen face was Madman Li. He had joined the army at the age of 12, and his mecha had produced countless legendary battle results. He had enough experience and background to scold these originally proud and powerful officers in the room. Lin Ai sat in the corner. He quietly listened to the first lecture of this acting teacher. He felt that there was something different between the lines. It was as if he was deliberately provoking a certain emotion in everyone, causing the atmosphere in the room to become irritable. "This, young Commander Li." He took off his military cap, rubbed his bald head, and asked seriously, "I want to ask, under the current circumstances, what should the 17th Division do to be considered ruthless?" The officers of the 17th Division in the room all knew very well that the so-called current circumstances referred to the NTR unit of their division being ordered to carry out the most difficult mission, and then being framed as a traitor by the upper echelons of the military. Under the pressure of the Federation's investigation department and the pursuit of the small-eyed combat department, they had suffered heavy casualties, but they could do nothing about it. Madman Li did not answer his question. His eyes were downcast as he said indifferently, "The mecha unit under my command has already been handed over. I want to know where the mecha of the 17th Division are now, what their condition is, and whether they can fight. Other than the engineering-related mecha, our division has a total of 144 MX model military mecha, all in camp. The mecha group is in good condition, and their self-test frequency has not decreased. They are ready for battle at any time, but Commander." The new 17th Division mecha manager, Hua Xiaoxi, stood up to report. As time passed, his voice grew more and more excited, but also somewhat doubtful. He had vaguely guessed something, but did not dare to believe it. He asked in a trembling voice, "Where are we going to fight?" "As soldiers of the Federation, wherever the enemy is, we will go to fight." Madman Li said a phrase very similar to Group 7's famous saying, and after a short pause, he continued, "Whether those enemies are outside or inside the army." Hearing this, the officers of the 17th Division in the room finally understood what he wanted to do. The expressions on their faces fluctuated between shock and doubt, excitement and hesitation, and in the end, they were all replaced by an iron-blooded ruthlessness. All the officers, including He Lei, pushed back their chairs and stood up. With a clap, they stood at attention and saluted the acting commander behind the desk. Although they remained silent, their attitude was already clear. Acting Commander Li Feng, who had just entered the 17th Division's camp less than half an hour ago, led his subordinates in dozens of bulletproof military vehicles, leaving the camp in a cloud of dust. The convoy's destination was the base where the Federal Military Headquarters was located. The black explosion-proof tires rotated at high speed, letting out ear-piercing screeches from time to time. The stones in the field were crushed and sent flying in all directions, and the soft soil was thrown everywhere. Dozens of Federation military vehicles roared forward at the same time, dragging countless black and yellow tails behind them. It was an exceptionally majestic sight, and the momentum was astonishing. The base war zone had been completely controlled by the Federation 3 years ago. Within an area of several thousand square kilometers, there were 17 Federation ground troops stationed, and the total number of soldiers exceeded 200,000. Although there was no need to closely monitor the rear of the base, this shocking convoy still alerted the sentries of the various troops at first notice. The reorganized Mechanic Division, the new Armored Division, the Rapid Reaction Brigade, and the various troops all tried to do something after receiving the information, but when those generals with outstanding military achievements confirmed that the convoy came from the new 17th Division base, and that Madman Li was sitting in the military vehicle at the very front, they immediately understood what the new 17th Division wanted to do. After a moment of silence, they restrained their troops and entered a strange period of silence. It was impossible for the Federation headquarters in the base to remain silent. Lieutenant General Hu Lian's forcefully suppressed cold voice rang out in the vehicle's system. "Little Feng, you want to start a mutiny right after taking office? This is King nonsense. Go back immediately." Madman Li looked at the base lugs in the distance and replied expressionlessly, "Commander, if the 17th Division really wants to mutiny, there will be more than just a few dozen military vehicles here." Lieutenant General Hu Lian roared angrily, "A few dozen military vehicles? Don't think that you can hide from the eyes of the headquarters just because you have an old friend in the General Staff Department. The Bureau of Proclamation just sent out an emergency report, and the Federation has detected that the 17th Division's mecha have been activated and are on the way. What are you trying to do? Is there something wrong with your brain?" Madman Li's delicate eyebrows slowly furrowed. He really did not expect that the tattered charter network of planet Mo Hua would be able to notice his deployment so quickly. After a moment of silence, he calmly replied, "Commander, as the acting commander of the 17th Division, I will be leading my division's Internal Affairs Department to the forward base to investigate some officers who are suspected of collaborating with the enemy. In order to prevent any resistance, I have ordered the mecha group to be activated. Please understand. Lieutenant General Hu Lien angrily rebuked, T. What authority does a division's Internal Affairs Department have to investigate a case? Or are you saying that you, as a division commander, want to overthrow the headquarters? You misunderstand. The vehicle was shaking, but Madman Li's face did not tremble at all. He replied in a low voice, the front lines need stability, and the troops need stability. I don't have any thoughts about the headquarters, but since I am the commander of the 17th Division, there are some things that I need to express. Don't forget your identity. You are a soldier of the Federation, and a soldier's duty is to obey orders. If you don't withdraw immediately, I will arrest you for attempted mutiny. Madman Li very succinctly replied with 2 words, welcome. After a moment of silence on the other end of the communication system, Lieutenant General Hu Lien's somewhat tired voice rang out again. This is the front lines. Your attitude will make the entire situation uncontrollable. Little Feng, you should know very well what it means to have the Empire's people watching us from the north. If the base is in chaos, what it means. It is precisely because the Empire's people are watching us from the north that I must first remove the abscesses in the base. Otherwise, the soldiers fighting on the front lines will have to constantly be on guard against a cold shot from behind. How will this battle continue? This is a mutiny. Lieutenant General Hu Lien was clearly enraged by the convoy that the new 17th Division had sent out. He heavily slammed the table and roared angrily, "Even you can't bear this responsibility." Madman Li slightly raised his eyebrows and said with a bit of mockery, "The responsibility of a mutiny on the front lines is great. I am only a temporary division commander, and you are the commander. You must bear this responsibility." Li Feng, you really are a madman. The convoy began to slow down, and the smoke outside the window gradually settled down. Madman Li's raised eyebrows slowly calmed down, and he calmly replied, "Everyone knows that." Without waiting for the other side of the communication system to ask again, he ended the communication. Staring at the non-stop beeping of the communication system, the livid Lieutenant General Hu Lien's lips twitched slightly. He asked with a hoarse voice, "Have they boarded the ship?" Director Barry and the Federation Investigation Department officials haven't had time to board the ship. The staff officer behind the general nervously replied, "The scheduled landing time has passed, and the spaceship hasn't arrived at the base yet. The 17th Division headquarters once had a secret communication with the Federal Fleet. I don't know if this has anything to do with it." Lieutenant General Hu Lien placed both hands on the table, his shoulders slightly trembling. After a long period of silence, he ordered with a tired voice, "Suspend the defense of the base and withdraw all ground forces from Area Y3. As for the Federation Investigation Department, just inform them." The staff officer looked at him in shock, and then immediately sobered up. He understood that the general had finally chosen to retreat and betray the enemy when faced with the madness of Little Division Commander Li. The gates of the base were opened wide to welcome the guests. The various heavy weapons hidden in the corners were silent and quiet like the girls in a nightclub. Facing the dozens of new 17th Division military vehicles that roared in, they were incomparably reserved and shy, not making any active reactions. The new 17th Division fleet roared into the base, and then accompanied by the sharp screech of brakes, they surrounded Area Y3 where the Joint Investigation Department was located. More than 100 fully armed soldiers pushed open the doors and alighted, raising the guns in their hands with murderous intent. After the Joint Investigation Department received the information, under the forceful orders of the base headquarters, they prepared to leave in a somewhat sorry state. However, for some reason, the warship in charge of transport still hadn't arrived. This was their misfortune, but also their fortune. Because right now, in Area Y3, the Small Eyes Special Forces that belonged to them had already gathered. These Federation's most powerful special forces numbered no less than 300 people. The strength comparison was very good. Director Barry looked at the other side with a gloomy expression and began to prepare a lecture to seize the other side's courage. Then, he would painfully explain the situation to facilitate negotiations. With a muffled bang, the doors were slammed shut. Li Feng slowly walked to the center of the field, facing the 300 Federation's most elite special forces, and said with an expressionless face, "There is no negotiation, only surrender." You're tuning in to the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.